Hello, my fellow Westorians. Welcome to Valar Rereadis for Dunk and Egg. Let's see what today brings us, my fellow Westorians, and Dancing Sean of House Beard. What are you drinking today, my friend?
This Rita actually said I should drink something bright red for Aryan Bright Flame.
Okay.
This is a mango juice mixed with the naked strawberry banana drink mixed with the watermelon Mountain Dew.
Whoa.
And it's delicious. It is really
I
good.
doubt it.
I would try that if I was still drinking soda.
Well, let's see. Today, we've got a lot of fun stuff. Last time we talked about a variety of topics. This time, we're going to be moving on to the challenge, the sigil, the shield, the quote-unquote accident that was not an accident. Lots more comparisons, a few house histories. As usual, there's a lot to cover, and we're going to have a lot of fun along the way. Thanks to Nina, Good Queen Alley with 1L.tumblr.com. Her thoughts are throughout this episode. We've got a lot of great takes from her mixed in with ours. Together, we create a lot of interesting concepts to discuss, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thanks as well to our patrons who keep us going. It's a little tougher here in the what we call the doldrums, I suppose you could say. There's been a long time since there's been new material. There's stuff on the horizon with House of the Dragon and other spin-offs and the Winds of Winter eventually. But right now, there's less going on, but we're keeping it going. Almost every week, we're putting out a new episode and occasionally more than one. So thank you to those of you who are supporting us in that endeavor. We're going to keep them coming. And I hope you all continue to support us. You can ask questions regarding this or other episodes, other topics, anything you want, really.
Aziz, I have a question.
Okay, let's get right to it. What is your question?
What is your shirt? 2 suns, 2 moons?
This is the
quartered.
This is the sigil of House Tarth. This is Brienne's sigil.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought that was appropriate, huh? I can't see your shirt. What do you have on?
This is a mashup of the Beatles, the Abbey Road, and of the Cowboy Bebop characters.
Nice. Very, very cool. What's the Shea got going on over there?
I'm wearing a Jackie Daytona regular human bartender shirt.
If you don't get that reference, that's from What We Do in the Shadows, which is a hilarious show / movie. It started as a movie and became a show.
You made a show out of it.
Yeah. When a movie's good enough to spin off into a show, that says a lot. So yeah. Okay, well, let's get right to it. Like I said, you can ask live questions. The rest of you, Sean took advantage of that right away, but the rest of you can do that as well. You can send them ahead of time through one of our discussion groups, Facebook, Flick, Twitter, Slack, Discord, Patreon, lots of ways. You can email us a question if you like at westeroshistory@gmail.com, or you can post them live here during the stream, and Ashay will put them in our document for us to get to whenever it's appropriate. Okay, so let's start with the Squire. That's roughly where we left off. There's a couple of different things. Actually, no, let me back up. Well, let's start with the rejection and the acceptance. And at the end of the acceptance is when Dunk goes back to his pavilion, and we'll talk about Egg and the sigil. So we'll start with Maekar saying, "Why would you deign to joust with a hedge knight?" And so it's immediately taking us back to this place of how much social contract is in place here, how much separation, how much classism is in place. Like, why would you deign to joust with a head knight? It's not kind of an odd question, right? I mean, it's a tournament. You get paired up against him. What's he supposed to do? Say, I refuse to joust this man?
Maybe it's that known that you manipulate the pairings, that you make sure you don't face anyone unworthy in the first round or whatever.
Yeah, maybe.
Maekar just assumed that Baelor would do that.
He never thought through it. He's like, why were you fighting it? Like, that never happens. What strange set of circumstances led you to be facing a hedge knight? But Baelor, of course, plays it off as he seems to do somewhat normally. Obviously, we don't have a lot of background on him, but throughout this story anyway, he's pretty chivalrous. He takes the comment in stride, doesn't be like, what a strange comment, brother. He just says, well, I want to learn about all my foes, and whether they're he gets it. We talk about how Maekar is so much like Stannis, but in this moment, it's almost like the opposite, because it's like Stannis would be the one might think would say, a sword is sharp in whoever's hands it's wielded. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like his birth doesn't determine how sharp his sword is or how skilled he is. It helps. Like the education matters. Absolutely. Like some of these knights have been training since they were kids because they could afford to, and that matters. But
let me ask a question here real quick.
Yeah.
How old is, approximately, could you guess how old Baelor, Maekar are at this point in the story?
Well, we don't have to guess. We have precise numbers on them.
Okay.
Let's see. Maekar was, if I remember, I don't have it in front of me, but I think Maekar was 18 at the Blackfire Rebellion at the Battle of Redgrass Field. Maybe he was 21. He was either 18 or 20. Maybe Baelor was 21. I think Maekar was 18. So that would put him at 31 or 32 now. So he's early 30s. We'll just say early 30s right now. And
how old is Stannis?
Stannis
at the time of Game of Thrones, where we know him best.
That's also about his age. A little
They're
older.
about the same
I think
age? Okay.
A little bit older. I think like early mid-30s, but that I'm not sure about. So very close. Either way, pretty close.
I was thinking maybe that Maekar was 24 and Stannis was 39, and just a difference in wisdom and experience in life might have affected their mentalities. But if they're about the same age, then Maekar has no excuse.
Yeah. Yeah, and this, of course, is Maekar's even higher born than Stannis was. The Targaryens are not at their height right now, but as we've seen, there's so many of them, and I don't think I'm guessing that the Baratheons never quite got to this level where they were people were throwing matches to them in tournaments and things like that, right? Like I guess the circumstances may not even come up in the first place. I mean, Renly did some jousting, but by the time Robert's king, they're already like, no, you shouldn't joust anymore, because, well, we saw what happened. We saw, when he tried to enter the melee, Cersei tried to con him through reverse psychology into doing exactly that. So,
I mean, we already see everyone throwing it to Lionel Baratheon.
That's funny. I like Lionel is a great pivot here, because he's obviously so similar to his ancestor or his descendant Robert, but it's the same kind of thing where you think even this guy isn't really that chivalrous. Like, he's not unchivalrous, but is it really chivalrous to laugh at your opponent? Like before, you're like, you're just like this guy challenged me, he's just laughing the whole time. I mean, and then we get to that part where he's knocking their like fancy hood ornaments off their helmets and throwing it into the crowd. Like, I mean, I like that. He's basically Robin Hooding their helmets, but I don't know if that counts as chivalrous, like looting them during the tournament.
Yeah. A lot of the things he's doing is making him more popular or famous, even if they're not as chivalrous necessarily. He's not doing anything specifically not chivalrous. Like, a lot of times you sort of associate a level of maybe professionalism or stoicism with chivalry, but it's not necessarily part of it, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So you could see from the surface why someone might not think Lionel is chivalrous, but he isn't necessarily not chivalrous. Yeah. But one way or the other, he's making himself more popular.
So one of the things that Dunk brings up when he's trying to convince them, if we recap real quickly, he talks to Manfred Dondarrion first and talks about how he squired for Sir Arlen, and Arlen was part of the army that went to go into Dorne to fight the Vulture King. Well, there's been a couple of Vulture Kings, but this was a particularly notable example. And this wasn't that long ago, only a few years ago. He says 3 years passed. And, well, that might not have been the best thing to bring up. Like, it worked, like you'd think it was. Like, I like in a vacuum, in a nutshell, you would be like, yeah, this is a smart thing to bring up a connection. But there's a lot of ill will around this whole thing. The Vulture King was a pretty substantial rebellion. It's very hard to believe that he didn't have support from some of the other lords who didn't support him openly, right? They didn't openly back him because that would make them rebels too. But he did so well and had so many men and wasn't contained. Like, the local Dornish lords didn't stop him either. It fell to the Iron Throne, even though his base was in Dorne. So there's a lot of ill will over this. It's kind of suspicious that he got going so far. And there's also like, they had to go into Dorne and fight in the Red Mountains, which is a really horrible place to have a campaign. So I don't know. He may have lost some people. He may not like thinking about it. He may like, yeah, that was a whole big cluster F, and he doesn't want to. I don't know. There's a lot of negativity around that event. So, and it may remind him of the unease that still exists between Dorne and the rest of the realm, because as we've been over several times, this is in that interim period where there's still a lot of ill will on both sides, and it's just coming. It's going to take a generation or two before these things kind of smooth out.
Is cluster F kind of like control F?
It is, yeah. You're kind of like you're trying to find.
So maybe like the opposite of control F, cluster F.
Yeah, it's control Z. Yeah, cluster Z. But also, this is another, like, speaking on terms of like chivalry and the feudal responsibility of a lord to their vassals. Like, this is pretty crappy what Manfred does here. He's supposed to, like, it's not strict here. Like, Dunk isn't his business. It's not his responsibility. But usually when you're like, hey, my master fought for you, usually that's supposed to be a thing to say, hey, okay, good job. You know, like, I appreciate that. You're supposed to at least be nice to the guy, right? So it's kind of odd. Or it's just more of this classism, like, just get away from me, rope belt man, you know?
Yeah, I was going to say, it. Probably if Dunk had shining armor on, you know, he might have like, oh, yes, come join me. Of course, I remember Arland, yeah. But when the way he's presenting himself, the same guy, if he had seen Dunk, well, I was going to say the same guy, if he had seen Dunk perform in the tournament, might have been like, actually, Dunk keeps losing right away.
Yeah, that's another thing that's kind of funny, that he never actually gets a chance to lose, because other stuff happens first. But yeah, so it's pretty unfortunate. It's kind of sad. It's like, yeah, this guy these are the kind of men that you rely on to fill out your armies, and to go when things get tough. You add hedge knights and free riders and these other guys. They're an important part of the army. Maybe not the core of it, but they certainly bleed and sweat and die alongside your regular men. So yeah, this lack of respect is really notable. And this is one of the things I really want to focus on this episode, the Brienne connections. Now, when you compare Dunk to Brienne, and of course there's just infinite connections we can make, they both have social issues to overcome. For Brienne, it's her gender, quite obviously. She's accepted, quote unquote, accepted in quotes, not fully accepted, but because of her birth, because she's noble. They can't outright reject her. They don't tell her to leave. They just make it miserable for her so that she'll want to leave on her own. But she's just so tough and determined that it doesn't work. She's like, yeah, make fun of me all you want. I'm not going anywhere. For Dunk, it's obviously not his gender. It's his birth. It's the opposite. It's the gender is the issue that gets thrown in Brienne's face. And Dunk, no one's making fun of him for being a man. They're making fun of him for being poor and for being uneducated and lowborn and all that. So it's a different flavor of rejection, but it's you can make draw a lot of comparisons between those two, I think.
This is I was just thinking a minute ago, we were talking about the Baratheons and chivalry, how there's similar, like one has one and the other has the other, and they end up facing similar dilemmas or being judged similarly or whatever. I was thinking about Robert and Stannis, how Robert is not very chivalrous at all. Right?
Not really.
But kind of like Lionel, he's popular. He does things that make him popular. He's a great warrior. He's kind of boisterous. He even like pardons enemies. You know, he does a lot of things that make him popular. But in the meantime, he's cheating on his wife. He's drunk. Stannis, I think, is pretty chivalrous. I think he's pretty adherent to the code of chivalry. But he's terse. He's mean and cold. So he's not popular, even though he is chivalrous. And I think Martin likes to play around with like having two characters with certain elements that are opposed to each other, but still creating a parallel at the same time.
Yeah, and I would say, like, obviously there's some things that Robert is chivalrous about, something that Stannis isn't. Like, Stannis is
right.
Like the terseness, I think, like being polite is a function of chivalry, I think, and
Yeah,
being
yeah.
kind to your beaten foe, I think that's chivalrous too. But you're right. But
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. The examples
It's
you
not
cited,
like Robert has no chivalry or
Right.
Stannis is the epitome of it. But generally speaking, I think Stannis has more than Robert. But Robert is more popular than Stannis. So.
right? And these aren't like distinct concepts. It's not like there's some book of chivalry that clearly defines
Yeah.
what is and isn't chivalry. It's very much in the eye of the beholder. And the way we rate them within that framework, like some people might really value the politeness as a function of chivalry, but some people might think that's lower down on the list. The most important thing is to protect, people, is to be, stand up for what's right. So, and that's of course a really important point here. Like Dunk perhaps did the most important knightly thing there is here, standing up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves against someone that was stronger than them, just like Brienne does. And perhaps if we could try to get at what makes chivalry, what's the most bullseye concept amongst that group of ideas, it might be that. What would you think? Does something else come to mind for you, or do you kind of agree with that?
I kind of agree with it. I was going to say it's very easy to be chivalrous among a bunch of other chivalrous people.
Okay.
Right? When everyone is nice and kind and helpful and they're hanging out with each other. But when all of a sudden you have to stand up to the prince, right?
Yeah.
It's tougher to be chivalrous in some situations than other. And some people might back down and some people stand up. And those are the truly chivalrous ones. When you do it, when you're really being tested and do it anyway, I think that's the proof, if you will.
That's a great point, because when it's just times of peace, it's real easy to be all polite and friendly and just like, we all get along. Yeah, look how But when something goes wrong, that's when the real test comes. And like Dunk, the real test came to Dunk, and well, I guess you'd have to say he passed. I mean, he was lucky to survive it, but he absolutely did the thing that deserves praise.
This is a little abstract maybe, but if all the knights really wanted to be chivalrous, they would probably all be closer to Dunk. They'd be closer to Hedge Knights. They would be like, I don't know, the Peace Corps, the Salvation Army.
Sure.
They wouldn't be like running tournaments, seeing who can attack each other with sticks better. They'd be out with poor people, helping them plow their farms and teaching them how to read, Yeah,
vows of poverty are absolutely a thing that a lot of religious folk think is not just religious folk, but that's certainly associated with a lot of religious monks. It's a really big common thing with monks of all sorts of belief systems to live in virtual poverty or complete poverty or something close to that.
And you don't have to necessarily be in complete poverty, but you also don't have to have every outfit be worth the entire possessions of a poor person, of a local farmer or whatever. You could put some of at least your time into helping those people, if not some of your wealth.
You know what? That's something that the show did that I don't remember George ever mentioning specifically, that I thought was a really good line in the show, was when the High Sparrow points out like how expensive Marjorie's dress was. She's like, how many thousands of hours did someone spend making that? Like, how many hours of labor? I thought that was a really poignant way to do it. That was a good line. And it's here, you're right. Like that really comes up here. Like how much wealth goes into just one of those like helmets that got, like how many people could be fed for like the silver on just one fancy helmet like that. Yeah. So the income inequality in Westeros is really just off the charts, but that's reflective of several different periods in real history throughout the world, not just
including modern times,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No doubt. So yeah, it's funny too, just as a side note here, Baelor, he's got more ability to be a peacemaker. He outranks everybody except his father. So like if he's like, hey y'all, chill, they're going to be like, okay, we'll chill, but not just because he's making a good point, but because of who he is. Like, yeah, the prince is telling us to chill, I guess we should chill. If someone like Dunk would be like, hey yo, chill, they'd be like, shut up, Hedge Knight, like it just he could make the exact same points, the exact same truths, cite the exact same evidence, and they'd still be like, shut up, Hedge Knight.
It's easy to blow it off.
Like they would stop listening before the first sentence is done, right? Like their hackles are raised, they're already resisting it, right? There are like the only thing they've been taught about class starts to come before he's even done speaking, right? It's like this reaction. So yeah, so it's neat that Baelor's the peacemaker, though, in another sense, because that was like the point of his marriage, his parents' marriage, not his marriage. Like, he's the product of Targaryen marrying Dorne, and he really is embodying it in a lot of ways. Of course, so is his brother Maekar, and Maekar is like not. I mean, he's not anti-peace with Dorne. He's just not exactly a leading figure in making it work out better, right?
It's another interesting thing you got to think about is how much was Baelor raised to play this role versus Maekar.
That's a good point, because he's the first
Maybe
son.
Naturally they were just better and worse people, but you got to imagine some amount of Baelor's whole life was preparing him for this role. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. After all, like, we've seen, the firstborn son is very often like given not just the responsibility of carrying the family name, but carrying on the family ideals, like, you complete my work, son, that kind of thing. Carry on our house tasks or whatever, carry on my legacy, that sort of thing. And Daeron, right, Baelor's father, was carrying on Baelor the Blessed's legacy, and that's an extreme legacy of peace. I mean, talk about a peaceful guy. There, you really can't get any more peaceful than Baelor the Blessed. His attitude towards peace was arguably a little insane, but still, you kind of appreciate it anyway. Were you going to say something?
Well, I realized I might be jumping into something else. I was just thinking about the idea of like carrying on a legacy. How Egg's mother, she was Danish, right?
Yeah, she was from Danish. Yeah, she was from House Dane, yes.
And Egg recommends Dunk put the falling star on his shield,
right? Yeah, you're right. So actually, that's a good segue, because if you recall, someone in the books, I can't remember who it was, mocked I think Tom 07's for rhyming "carry on" with Dondarrion, and you just said "carry on" the legacy. So, and our next topic is the Dondarrion Sigil, which is a segue to Dunk's Sigil and the falling star with House Dane and all that. So, well played, Sean. You've done well. So yeah, this story of House Dondarrion is like a lot of founding myths. It's kind of hard to believe that it really happened like that. But I don't know that the point isn't whether it really happened or not. The point is, I think, to provide us with some symbolic resonance. I mean, you can take from it what you want, but there's this very similar aspect to the shooting star and this lightning kind of out of nowhere, because like this lightning, it saved this messenger, right? It was hugely important. It saved House Dondarrion as well, or saved the Storm King from this trap or what have you. And likewise, you wrote later in the document that this is the luckiest thing, like meeting Egg was the luckiest thing Dunk could have happen. And he's realizing it right as he's seeing the shooting star. So it's a real similar, you have like a bolt, two purple, like purple lightning, a bolt from the blue, or it's like bolt from the purple.
A message from the sky.
Yeah. So it's really neat, because there's so much about the sigils here that George just adds this extra character that he's kind of a jerk. We love his ancestor. His ancestor Beric is great. Like, he's a great character, and he's very knightly, right? Like, Beric, extremely knightly. Like, one of the best examples of someone that has knightly ideals in the main series. That is also like highborn. That's Brienne's obviously the top example, I would think, or one of the top examples. But Beric Dondarrion, right? He's a really good example of, he's like, nope, we got to fight for these people. These common folk need our help, right? Like, it's hard to pick a better example.
Yeah, his I don't know, loyalty to or instructions from some higher lord or power or whatever are less relevant to him to the fundamental duties of a knight.
Yeah. But for him, it's both too, because Robert, they're like carrying on the orders from their king, right?
Yeah.
Like the king, but
like even when the king's gone, it doesn't matter. I'm still doing. The king told me to do the right thing. I'm still doing it, whether he's there or not.
Yeah,
so,
the king is more like that's supporting their argument rather than necessarily the main thing that they're about. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a little tangent too, but I just can't help but thinking about like the lightning bolt and the shooting star, and even earlier we talked about like how in this world as an Ivanhoe, there's this legitimate belief in the power of God, and in this world that we are more certain of the reality of mystical happenings than in our world. But even in our world, all our religions are full of stories of people walking on water and lightning bolts from the sky and stuff like that. And Carl Sagan talked about the idea, just kind of like imagining early humankind. It kind of makes sense that we would come up with the idea of gods being in the sky. Because think of how mystifying, once we can start to understand eventually after thousands of years how weather and electricity and the circulation of the sun and everything we can make sense of it all. But it must have been just completely baffling. And what's happening in the heavens, and how it comes down and affects us, it makes sense that we came up with the idea of gods up in the sky controlling our destinies and such. And even as society gets more evolved and develops culture and certain understanding, we still look to messages from the sky of lightning bolts and shooting stars to our luck or our omens for what we should do with crops, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's true. It is. If you really try to sit back and think about it, it is like try to put yourself in the place of ancient mankind, ancient humankind, ancient people. Yeah, what's going on up there?
How do you see lightning and not think that's magic?
Yeah, like what the hell is that? Yeah, like you got to call it something, and gods, sure, why not? Yeah.
One point Carl Sagan made, he was like, imagine if you're sitting at your campfire, you're a little tribe, and off in a distance, miles away, there's some other tribe sitting at their campfire. It would look like just a little speck of light in a distance. When you look up in the sky, it's all kinds of specks of light in a distance. Those must be campfires of some magical beings that just can float in the air,
Yeah. And, just like a lot of these things, someone invented a reason long ago, and that got passed down from father and mother to son and daughter and just kept on going. And
even some suspicious, skeptical young kid, like, what argument do you have against him? Like, I guess there are gods up in the sky. I don't
Yeah, you could like the idea of like proving it, evidence first didn't necessarily. So when he goes back to his camp, of course, he's got Egg sitting there, and like Egg's just being a squire. He's like, look, I'm going to be a squire. I'm your squire, and I'm going to prove it to you. And look, man, you need a squire. Look at you. Come on. You need me. It's pretty effective. It's like this combination of pointing to the obvious and just being stubborn and just kind of knowing that, he's going to win this argument. Like, he's going to convince this guy. He's like, his points are too strong. Also, he's got this attitude because he's a prince himself. Never forget, Egg is a prince, and it's one of the recurring things that happens. He says what's on his mind. He says blunt truths, partly because he's the fourth son of a king. Like, it's like Jaerion Lannister, if you remember him. He's the youngest of Tywin's brothers. He's the one that just was sarcastic and just commented on everything because, like, he's the youngest. There's all these, everyone's taking all the good jobs, Tywin just looms over everyone. So he's just like sits back and comments on everything. We've seen this trope before. The rich kid who's like not the firstborn. He's like big family, and he just is like kind of aloof and just, says what's really happening because why not? No one's going to stop him. He's got this sort of interesting perch to look down on everyone and really see what's happening, but without the day-to-day constant, like, you're going to be the next this or that, So it's like this kind of in-between state there. I like thinking about Egg that way. So he
has enough power and position to not be too worried about getting in trouble.
Yeah.
But not enough power and position to feel responsible for trouble he might cause.
Right. Like, if Baelor, the Blessed's out here, insulting people, it's a bigger problem than Maekar or even Aerion. Like what Aerion gets away with is wild compared to what Baelor doesn't, just the way he behaves. So, like, he doesn't try to get away with much at all, apparently. But if Aerion was the firstborn, you'd be sure that there would be some consternation. And in fact, there is consternation much later, much later, when for a short time he is next in line, and that's bad. So, like, uh-oh. And then his son, his 1-year-old kid, like, uh-oh, yeah, not him either. So here's a quote when Egg asks Dunk about his name.
Shoot, sorry, I don't know where you're at.
The Squire.
Okay, what's your name?
Dunk.
Dunk, he said. Oh, you got it? Okay.
Yeah.
The wretched boy laughed aloud, as if that was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Dunk, he said. Sir Dunk? That's no name for a knight. Is it short for Duncan? Was it? The old man had called him Dunk for as long as he could recall, and he did not remember much of his life before.
Isn't that wild to think about? Like, he doesn't know his own name. I mean, it's one thing to be like, he doesn't know exactly how old he is. You can kind of get that because, like, hey, Westeros doesn't have birth certificates and dates, you know, like, they do have dates, but they don't have, like, you know, a census bureau or a place that keeps all this information. Most families they just
might
remember
have dates, but they don't have days of the week, do they?
Not do they? I don't know. They have hours.
It's something I saw someone point out
guess they don't.
ever since I've realized I don't think they ever say Tuesday or Monday.
No, they don't. Yeah.
Sometimes they'll say a week from now or a fortnight,
Yep.
but I don't think they have days of the week.
Yeah, I don't think they do either. And so Theon, of course, would be very disappointed. You have to know your name, right? You know, so Dunk.
The only person who'd be more disappointed is Reek.
But I think one of the ways they do it is just by moons.
Yeah, the moon certainly.
Yeah,
Day
how
5
long?
of moon 5, you know, of
More
the
of a
year.
moon, more of a monthly cycle rather than a weekly cycle, I guess. They may not even think of week, like a week may not. Do they even have that designation of week? They may not.
Yeah, I don't know.
Week is like that. That's not necessarily even a category of time.
They have that. Yeah, they have like fortnight and weeks
They do
and
have
moon's
okay.
turn and, you know, tomorrow, you know.
Clearly, it's not something I've ever looked into specifically. But it's neat to think about, to bring up Reek here, because so much of how Aegon behaves and acts is in response to his brother and Aerion. Like he shaves his head because he doesn't want to look like his brother. He doesn't want to. He's tormented by him in ways that remind us of Euron, and so this is very much shaping who he is. I mean, it's not nearly as bad as Theon and Reek. Obviously, there's no like actual direct physical. He's not flaying him. There is some direct physical torment, but it's not nearly to the level of losing fingers and such. So it's really kind of neat that Dunk, it's another irony, another reversal. Dunk is trying to distinguish himself. Egg is trying to undistinguish himself. He's like, no, I want to be less like that. You want to be more like that? I want to be less like that.
Another juxtaposition, I guess. Dunk is a strong, healthy, near adult, young man. Yeah, I gotta find some work. Egg is like a little kid, a rich little kid. He's like, I got a job. I'm
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. That's true. He's like, no, and he did it in a very like precocious way. He's like, no, I'm your squire. He's like, I don't need a squire. No. He's like, yeah, you do. Look. And he's just like, he's got the evidence. He's like, at the receipts. He's like, look, man, look at your horse. Look at your armor. Like, look at that. Look at that. Come on. You definitely need my help. Now here comes my favorite quote of the whole book, whole novella, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, I love this quote.
Should I let you read
No,
it?
you go
or-
ahead.
This is Egg soon fell asleep.
Yeah.
Egg soon fell asleep beside the dying fire. Dunkland is back nearby, his big hands behind his head, gazing up at the night sky. He could hear distant music from the turning grounds, half a mile away. The stars were everywhere, thousands and thousands of them. One fell as he was watching, bright green streak that flashed across the black and then was gone. The falling star brings luck to him who sees it, Dunk thought. But the rest of them are all in their pavilions by now, staring up at silk instead of sky. So the luck is mine alone.
Yeah, I just love it in part because it's very poignant. It's like Dunk this is part of his emotional intelligence that we talked about last time, that he finds ways to get confident. Confidence is a form of emotional intelligence, and he's using like creative thinking to give himself a mental edge, right? And he believes it. He's not just like working himself up. This is something he feels. It's something that he trusts, this instinct. It's not like telling yourself something that you don't really believe, like I'm brave. No, I'm ready for this, like psyching yourself up. He seems to sincerely believe this, at least the way it's written. That's how I took it. And I love this attitude of showing reasons why his situation is better than someone who's like rich and potentially corrupted by that wealth. He's like, look, he's looking on the bright side, right? And you can't see the bright side when you're in a tent. Like the brightness of that star is only visible to him because of his scenario. So like it's the epitome of looking on the bright side, right? He's like, well, I don't have these things they have, but I have this instead. And it's a really great thing. So I'm really happy with that.
Yeah, I also like the idea that Dunk is it's like giving some value to his lack of wealth or whatever, right? He's out under the stars and everyone else has their fancy tents, but they're missing out on the real experience, the potential for luck or whatever.
Yeah, they're so busy doing other things, or who knows? Yeah.
Also, I see a note here that I got it backwards, that Dunk wanted the falling star. Egg pointed out the Elm Tree. I guess that's a note that Nina made. So
yeah, I guess that's important because Egg, as we talked about, he doesn't have a huge connection to his Dane family, given his mother died young. He may have known her very little at all. Like maybe she died when he was like 2, maybe even younger than that. But not much younger, obviously.
I just wanted to take note of Arian, how hateful he is to the Dornish there, despite his mother being Dornish, which also made me wonder how well he knew her. He wouldn't have been that old maybe when she died.
That's a good point.
I wonder if maybe he wants to distance himself from the Dorn. Like maybe he's like frustrated that his mother was Dornish.
Yeah, I think he maybe could have some self-hatred there as well. I'm sure it's possible he'd gotten made fun of or teased for it, perhaps. But there had been some Dornish intermarriage at that point. I feel like the Targaryens wouldn't have been too mean to each other about Dornish love.
It is interesting. Yeah, like it might be more painful in some ways because it depends. It just really depends. We just don't know. It might be less painful. I'm gonna use myself as an example. I have half siblings because my mother and father had me when they were young, and then they split up. And my father had kids with another woman. I don't really have a lot of ill will towards my father because I never knew him. I have no memory of him at all. I've never met him. He was gone when I was 6 months old. My siblings, who are 3 of them in particular, have the same mother, and he left them also, but they were of an age to remember it. So they have, much stronger feelings on the matter because they remember it happening. And the age at which that happens is the age at which you have to process it. You can't just like, I'm going to think about this 5 years from now. No, you think about it when your mom or dad leaves. That's when it hits you. So the age you're at is like, what formative stage are you at when this hugely impactful event in your life happens? And that's a problem for us here because we just don't know with Egg. We can estimate because he's only a certain age. It had to be within this certain time frame. But so we can be very sure that his brothers had more time with their mother and may have known them and would have had potentially much stronger bonds with her. And yeah, and we also just don't know what kind of person she was. For all we know, she sucked. She may have been.
Yeah, yes.
Like I assume she was decent, but I think that's just because I have a Dane bias. For like, there's no reason.
She was more like Darkstar.
Yeah,
and that's where Arian got all of this. It's possible.
It's also possible that maybe she wasn't necessarily terrible, but she might not have been excited about this marriage. She might have been forced into this marriage. She might have loved someone else. This marriage is arranged by her parents. She's doing what she has to do, but she doesn't like it. Maybe turn to alcohol, Cersei-ish kind of scenario or something, That is what happened with the prior generation, in fact. Aegon the Unlikely, Aegon the Fourth, right? He's the one that had all the bastards, all the great bastards, Daemon Blackfire being one of them. So he basically
is responsible for the Blackfire Rebellions because he legitimized Daemon and all that. His mother is left when they were really young. She was from Lys, and she did not like Westeros, and Westeros didn't really like her. There was some stuff early in her life where they tried to, she was part of the Secret Siege. She was trapped in the Red Keep when there was a coup attempt and all this other stuff. And she left, and her kids didn't like that. You wouldn't think, right? Like Aemon the Dragon Knight and Aegon the Unlikely, or Aegon the Unworthy. Like, that had to have a huge impact on them, too. And it may be part of why Aegon the Unworthy was such a bad king. You can't pin it all on his mother, obviously. That's a bit much. But still, like, we prefer all kids to have a mother growing up. That's ideal. And sometimes when they don't have a mother, this is, there's some pretty significant consequences for the rest of society. And for that person. Okay, let's move on. That was a pretty good little diversion. But so the actual decision of the shield, like he goes to get the shield painted, and he's got this idea of what it should look like based on this previous scene, and it's really neat. I'm going to use take one of Nina's takes here. So Baelor tells Dunk that you can't inherit, Arlen's arms because you're not his son. Now, actually, Baelor is probably exaggerating what's law and what's custom. But when Baelor directly tells you this, you can't exactly. You're like, oh, well,
it's sort of law now.
Yeah. It's like, okay, you just told me how it works. So he basically has been told you can't use that sigil. And so he has to choose something. The color of sunset, because Arlen liked sunsets. That's just, that gets you in the feels there. He's trying to establish, at least maintain, preserve some of who Sir Arlen was. He wants to commemorate. I think commemorate is probably the right word here. So he is sort of taking this rule of not using the previous sigil, but we see like it's inspired by the previous sigil. And that's the kind of thing we see all over. We've seen like people take on new sigils based on something that happened, like Raleigh Duckfield, who is a great example because he's a parallel to Dunk in so many ways. His thing as well. I was in a field and I looked up and there were ducks. So Duckfield. Like it's sometimes it's more creative than that. Actually, it's usually more creative than that because that's about as basic as you can get.
You could at least be more embellished than that. He could have been Hawkfield or something.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't have to be a compound word, man. You can do it could be a little more.
He was basically the epitome of the trope in TV where someone can't come up with their name. So they just like their eyes look around the room and they're like, my name is a shared guitar light.
Lamp man. Yeah. What's the name of your dentist? Dr. Crentist.
Sounds a lot like maybe that's why he became a dentist. Yeah. So yeah, totally. So this really this fits really well. And so you feel that like this is sort of chivalrous. He's carrying on the tradition of the man who taught him. He's paying homage to the guy that made him what he is, the guy that pulled him out of the gutters and maybe didn't enrich him, but gave him enough to work with, right? The man that taught him pretty much everything he knows, the guy that gave him a chance in life. So of course you want to, remember that and be inspired by that and be honorable about it. I'm not sure some of the right words are escaping me here, but you get what I'm saying. He's trying to remember the man that was basically his father, And that's what all these houses do. All these famous houses, that's a big thing. It's like we're carrying on the traditions of our ancestors. Dunk he's capturing the soul of that by remembering the person instead of this house that contains these people, right? And as for the elm tree itself, it's pretty perfect as a symbol as well for the sigil. After all, he's sleeping under this tree. It's basically what it really says Hedge Knight. I mean, it's not a hedge, it's a tree, but it's it's just one step up, I guess, you know. It's one of the nicer trees, you know.
There's also maybe some allusion to the idea of being rooted. That it's, you know, the core's fundamental, Dunk's fundamental values are very strong and rooted.
Earthly. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. A man of the earth.
It's connected to the ground and the earth more so than to some castle or some weapon or whatever else. You know?
Yeah, that's a good point. It reminds us of, what's his name, Septon Maribald, who just lived off the land. In fact, he didn't even, like, literally didn't even wear shoes. So, like, talk about close to the earth. That guy was taking it to another level. But, you know, just much as we respect Septon Maribald, it's some of these same things are here with Dunk. It's like, obviously Maribald's been doing his thing for decades, and Dunk's just getting started. But you see some of the same sort of elements in that. Or maybe a better example be Elder Brother, because he used to be a knight, the one that's and Brienne meets Elder Brother and Sandor, of course. So that's also pretty fitting, I think, to bring him up, because he's a really big guy. Like, Brienne looks at him and is like, well, this guy used to be a warrior, and then he just goes on and makes some points back exactly like that. And Maribald was a warrior too. He has that describes that story where his friends were all under-equipped, but they were excited about battle, and it all went terrible, and he was basically the only one that survived. And yeah, that's the other side of living close to the earth, is getting forced to fight for a cause you don't understand or believe in or even have all the information on, and then all of a sudden
which Dunk also experiences.
Yep, you're right. And then all of a sudden you're on someone else's side. You're like, nope, now you're on my side because I said so. And yeah, more of that in the next story on Dunk and Egg. That gets brought up a little more with those peasants who are like, wait, who are we fighting? what is going on here? Yeah, you really, that concept really gets brought out even more there. Now, and another great point here from Nina, by including the shooting star, Dunk distinguishes himself from other Hedge Knights. There might be thousands of Hedge Knights roaming the Seven Kingdoms, but only he had received its luck. This tourney would fundamentally change Dunk's life. Like, he did get lucky. It looked like bad luck, but a number of lucky things that totally set his career going forward happen within this, like, 24-hour span here.
Baelor should have been sleeping outside.
He did need a little more luck, I think. Yep, I think so. It was definitely not his good luck. So let's see. But on Brienne's side, let's talk about Brienne for a second. We know that this is how we know. Let's go through the connection here. So in case some of you all aren't familiar with why Brienne's shield scene is so important. So first of all, Brienne is confronted by Sir Illifer, who has been part of our cast of characters in this discussion. In our first episode, we brought him up because he is an actual Hedge Knight. And do you have this quote ready here, Sean? The one with Sir Illifer? Yeah.
You're muted, Sean. You pulled.
Oh crap! Sorry.
You pulled a me. It's okay.
All right. Man, I made some of the most amazing comments just now. You just missed them all.
I guess so.
Okay, sorry. Sir Illifer crooked a bony finger at her shield. Though its paint was cracked and peeling, the device bore it showed plain. A black bat on a field divided bendwise, silver and gold. You bear a liar's shield, to which you have no right. My grandfather's grandfather helped kill the last of Lothston. None since has dared show that bat. Black as the deeds of them that bore it.
Well, first of all, Illifer's grandfather's grandfather should be around this time. If he helped put the Lostons down, that's only about 20 years from this point, about 23, 24 years. So that dude was probably already alive. Maybe he was just born or something like that. But yeah, that's just drawing a little connecting dot here. So what happens is Jaime gets this shield, this shield of House Lothston, which is hard to say, and gives it to Brienne. And then Brienne carries it to Maidenpool, where she's told, that sigil is, that's a bad sigil. And this is, of course, Sir Illifer says the same thing before she gets there. So she's like, I'm going to get it painted. And that's a really important moment because she says, I want to get it painted. And the person at the gate is like, oh, really? Well, my sister does painting, so that was a good thing for her to say, because this guy can now do his sister a solid and send her some business, and which is exactly what happens. And so she remembers, and here's the moment. Here's the quote where she has this thought.
The arms of Tarth were quartered rose and azure and bore a yellow sun and crescent moon. But so long as men believed her to be a murderess, Brienne dare not carry them. Her door reminds me of an old shield I once saw in my father's armory. She described the arms as best she could recall them.
And then Ashea will read the second part where she remembers this shield.
It was more a picture than a proper coat of arms, and the sight of it took her back through the long years to the cool dark of her father's armory. She remembered how she'd run her fingertips across the cracked and fading paint, over the green leaves of the tree, and along the path of the falling star.
It really spoke to her. She was really into this shield. She really liked it, and we're supposed to linger on it as readers to maybe let it sink in, or have us realize one day that this is the exact same shield that we were just described by Dunk's sigil here.
Interesting, in the next book, Lady Rohan does the same thing. She, kind of flirting with Dunk, rubs her fingers across the sigil on his chest.
Oh,
and also interesting convenience of someone, for both of them being right there. Oh, I can paint a shield. Like both of them, Dunk and Brienne, both had that convenient artist on hand.
Yeah, true. Like, of course, in a town like Maidenpool, of course there would be one. But the coincidence it being the gate guard's sister is that's where that comes up. And then like here at a tournament, there's going to be some painters, but,
apparently women.
Yeah, I guess so.
Seem to do this painting a lot.
It's not a manly job. Of course I'm joking. Of course it's a manly job. It's just a job. It's not really manly or womanly. It's just a job. It's a great job. The world needs more painters. My grandmother was a painter. Our house is filled with her art. Okay, so moving on. Talking about Dunk's, we'll have more Dunk and Brienne parallels. There's so many of them that it's unlike some of the other ones where I said we're going to do them all at once. Because that's more for the smaller comparisons, or some of the ones, or the ones that we don't list off. We'll kind of do a roundup. But for Brienne and Dunk, it's kind of an ongoing, constant thing. Speaking of Brienne, another thing that they have in common. Brienne's big. People say big for a woman, but no, she's just big, period, right? She's larger than most men, and which does make her big for a woman, but let's put it in perspective. She's just big, period. Dunk is also just big, period, but also for a man, just big. Almost everyone is smaller than Dunk. What's interesting is, to me as well, is that we don't have that POV in A Song of Ice and Fire. When you think of A Song of Ice and Fire, who's the largest person that we have a POV from? It's probably Brienne. Like that.
It's Brienne.
Yeah, like physically the largest person is her. Which doesn't exactly tell us what it's like to be a large man in this setting, because a large man gets respected, whereas Brienne gets looked down on for being a freak of nature. Now, we readers don't look at her that way. At least I hope we don't. But in world, she's not. Her size doesn't make people don't. It's the totally different reaction. People look at Dunk like, oh, this guy is big and strong. Like, we can make use of him. Where for Brienne, it's like, what's wrong with her? Like, it's so backwards. But it still comes out in actual fighting. The advantages they have. One of Brienne's advantages is she's taught to play defense because these guys will tire themselves out trying to beat her quickly, because they don't want it said that a woman tested them. Now, of course, that's not a thing for Dunk at all, although it is a little bit, because they don't want it said that a hedge knight tested them. Someone like Baelor doesn't care, although he was clear to point out, no, it was 4 lances, not 7. So there's still a little bit of pride in there, but of course that's also just truth, apparently just truth. But there is still like that same attitude, like you don't want it said that a hedge knight tested you, right? We saw perhaps the best example of this that I can think of. Bronn, not a hedge knight, but may as well be. When he goes up against,
he's like a step down. He's a sellsword.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So when he goes up against Sir Vardis Egan, think about how confident all the knights were. They're like, oh, this is going to be easy. Sir Vardis, no problem. Like Bronn, this Bronn character, he's doomed. Like he's just a sellsword. You know, when there's a bunch of them and they can gang up on you, then they're dangerous. But one-on-one, oh, please. Yeah. Like their prejudice is so over the top. It's wild how much it distorts their view of reality. Like, no, this guy's sword is just as sharp. I mean, he might be better at fighting. Like, why is he better at fighting? Because he's not as rich. Like, it just doesn't make any damn sense.
He's had to do more of it. Yeah.
You're right. It's almost the opposite.
Wish we brought this up when I had my Bronn shirt on last week.
Bronn just has brains and brawn.
Oh, nice.
Imagine if he also had Bran.
Brains, Brawn, and Bran.
Triple threat.
But this ignores some of the advantages these characters have. Like, right, yeah, Braun has the advantage of knowing how to fight dirty. These knights look down on that.
Quote unquote dirty.
Right, they look down on it, even though it's an advantage. It's a strange distortion of reality. Like, it's really hard to, when you really illuminate these blind spots, they look really silly, right? But it's not unrealistic, because this seems to be reflected by lots of things in the real world that people just look down on for no good reason, just because of what it's the package it's wrapped up in.
It's not quite this simple, but our friend Rudy one time pointed out, who wins a fight? The person who realizes it's a fight first.
Ooh,
Like when the person realizes we're going to kill each other, the person who realizes that first, that's who's going to win. Now, obviously, if one person's 7 foot, 280 pounds, and the other one's 5 foot, 120 pounds, maybe that's not true, but assuming it's a near close match otherwise. And also think about the idea of like fighting dirty, how knights might look down. Like they have to be hypocritical to not... No one did anything dirtier than Arryn, right?
Yeah.
That's like by far the dirtiest thing
Definitely.
I can think of that anyone did. Like maybe some dirtiness we see in future, Uthor, what's his Underleaf or whatever, they fixing the rounds and stuff. Maybe that's as dirty as killing the horse, but I don't even think so.
I agree with you.
Even Loras, is that a dirty trick using the Marin heat,
I have that as an item to talk about. We'll come back to that. So I think it is. I mean, it is a trick. It's not as bad as killing the horse, although it did result in the horse being killed indirectly. Thanks to Gregor, but I don't blame Loras for that.
And some of these maybe are a little different in the tournament, right?
Yeah.
When there's it's a sort of a different set of rules than when you get to like the fight to the death, the trial by combat. Maybe it's a little bit, certain rules are out the window or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, Dunk himself thinks about how he's fighting dirty in that trial by combat, that trial by 7, right? But like you say, that is a fight to the death. I don't really think it's that dirty.
Yeah. Like,
except that they were in the mud. Yeah, they were dirty from rolling around. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's another there's a couple of bits of history in here. Obviously, we talked about the sigil stuff, but there's also this Florian and Jonquil story, and this is important setup because, well, this central conflict really starts because of Tansel being attacked by Arryn, and the Florian and Jonquil story is basically has a lot of parallels to this. Now, the Florian and Jonquil story isn't super well understood. It's the details of it aren't. It's more of the gist of it is what people respond to rather than the details, right? Florian was a lowborn, maybe a knight. He's called a knight, but it's a good example of where it's probably historical revisionism, because the Florian and Jonquil story is way predates knighthood. So it's like, it's not even like maybe the timelines are off a bit. No, they'd have to be way off for him to be a knight, but that's just that reflects how stories change with the time. Great example, the actual Iliad, Homer's Iliad. There's obvious anachronisms in Homer's version of the story, which is a pretty strong pretty strong evidence that he changed the story to suit his audience. Like a specific example is, I think I've even cited this before, is the burials, like the way they do burials. Like the way he cited burials was anachronistic to the Greeks of the era of the Trojan War. But he was describing current current funeral practices. So just one example of many. Historical revisionism is, the point being, very common. Details like that are added on. The sir, all you have to do is add a sir to change, to really just like tweak the story here. But the central line of the story is all men are fools and all men are knights where women are concerned. And that's a way to say, in this case, he's can be her rescuer, but he can also be, her idiot, or be like Arian, or there's a lot of ways to interpret that. I think it's so wide open that I'm not trying to say this is the only way to interpret it. Did you have an interpretation of that line, Sean, or anything that brings out of you?
Maybe the idea that sometimes there's a fine line, between being chivalrous and being foolish. That sometimes some higher ideal can lose sight of the needs of reality or something like that. But and you can like put yourself in harm's way, for the sake of a woman or some higher cause, or whether it's foolish or chivalrous. Sometimes it's hard to say.
Now, it's also important to remember that the Florian and Jonquil story, it takes place, the legendary event of their meeting takes place at Maidenpool, which, of course, we've brought up Maidenpool several times. Brienne goes to Maidenpool. It's one of the reasons George has her go there, probably to make all this work nicely, or to make it work even more. Of course, that's not crucial to any of this, but it's nice. It's a nice dot connecting. And it's part of, Brienne's journey, sort of being like a hedge knight. She's on the trail without exactly knowing where the trail is. A few other historical notes here. So we're about to see Abelar Hightower. Abelar Hightower is going to be one of the guys that loses to Valar, quite possibly on purpose. Abelar could either be the father or grandfather. Maybe, of course, he could be. You never know when a lord dies without sons and it passes to a brother or something like that. But we have a historical note from around this time, not long after. The Grey Plague is going to hit Old Town when Pycelle is a boy at the Citadel, which is probably only about 10, maybe 20 years from now. Pycelle was born in 216. So Pycelle's born 7 years from this where we're at now. And this Quentin Hightower, who would be either maybe the grandson or son of this Abelar, is the one who burned all the ships at port, closed the gates, wouldn't let anyone leave, which was the right thing to do. It was quarantine, right? If he had let people leave, the plague could have spread all over. But he was killed for this. He did the right thing and was killed for it. This is a great example of sort of high-level chivalry. Even though it's caused a lot of suffering, it prevented more suffering. Dunk is a parallel here, right? He did the right thing, and it almost got him killed. He got lucky and was saved by it. Quentin, not so much. He was murdered. Of course, you're named Quentin in this story. You tend to have bad luck, whether you do the right.
You're on thin ice.
Yeah, so
you're on thin ice and thick fire.
And this is a different spelling of Quentin too. This is Quentin rather than Quentin. But oh well, you can't fool the gods with little things like that.
Yeah, that's one of those things the Reach and the Dornish fight about.
Where the Y belongs?
Yeah.
Why do they fight over that?
Why the where belongs?
So the reason we bring up Jonquil and Florian, of course, is that's one of the, not only does it have a bunch of parallels here, but it's one of the puppet shows that Tancel is throwing. She also has, of course, Nymeria and the 10,000 ships. Now, Nina suggests Nymeria is maybe a bit of a Dornish nationalist tale, but it's not anti Seven Kingdoms, because Nymeria didn't tussle with the rest of Westeros that we know of. She was too busy uniting Dorne, and that's pretty cool that she did that. But there wasn't a lot of infighting with the Targaryens in her time that we know. Well, not the Targaryens, who weren't even in Westeros yet, but with the Seven Kingdoms. I guess it mostly would have been conflicts with the Reach and the Stormlands, as it had been for so long. So that's maybe interesting too, but it's maybe even despite the fact that it's not that Nymeria wasn't antagonistic or a foe to the Reach, it's still probably not the kind of character that people from the Reach are interested in. You know what I mean? Like maybe this isn't the right show for this audience. Not that it's offensive. The target, the one that gets Aryan, that one, you know, maybe that one is, but not that it was his reaction is obviously not justified, but this is still this. I don't know. This maybe she didn't maybe consider her audience.
She was playing with fire.
Yeah. So let's take a few more examples from the joust itself. So there's this great like interplay of we've talked about it a few times here. We've touched on it where chivalry doesn't always look like chivalry. Sometimes it looks chivalrous when it's not. And Loras, you brought up Loras, and that's a great example. Like Sansa came out of that thinking Loras was even more noble than he was before, even though he used a trick. Because he came out looking great. He surrendered to the guy that saved his life. He looked honorable, right? He was riding really well, and then the guy saves his life, and he's like, "You win." You know, like I can't challenge you. You're the winner. So it looks really noble. But it's also like, you might have just lost. I mean, like, Sandor might have just beaten you anyway. Like, you just took a sword to the chest. You're probably not at 100% anymore. Like, it's gracious, but it's also strategic, you know? And it's like, I'm going to look really good here. Like, I'm going to look super chivalrous here. My trick's not going to work again because it's, you know, like these other, like
it's a win-win.
Yeah, it looks great. He comes out looking great, doesn't have to fight another match. Yeah, like arguably he comes out looking better than Sandor because he's Loras. He's pretty and fancy.
Yeah.
And Sandor
already has a couple strikes against him.
Yeah.
Loras already has a couple notches on the plus side, so it reinforces the what people already kind of think, you know.
Now think about what Sandor said to, I guess it was to Sansa, I'm not sure, but he said Gregor's lance goes where Gregor wants it to. He was sure that the killing of Sir Hugh of the Vale was not an accident. Of course, this is part of feeding the plot to thinking it was a conspiracy, that someone ordered Gregor to kill Sir Hugh. Now, that turns out to be a red herring. Gregor saw an opportunity to kill someone and did it. That seems to be really the end of it. He saw a loose gorget, saw a little spot he could get, and did it. Now consider that. Consider how accurate these lances can be in someone's skilled hands, and think about what Leo Longthorn, the ancestor of Loras, who is mentioned a couple of times in the main series, specifically knocks the helmet off of the Grey Lion, right? And the Grey Lion's like, all right, I'm not fighting anymore because I don't have a helmet, and that's dangerous as hell to be flying around with these lances that are designed to splinter, right? These lances are designed to break. Nina writes that Henry II of France died this same way, like a splinter from a lance entering his eye, right? Going into his brain. And this, there was apparently a man in 2007 who died in a jousting reenactment because of a lance splinter. And Nina also writes that there was a Hungarian knight named Gregor Bacci who apparently survived for a year after taking a lance through the eye and out the back of his head.
Oh my!
His name is Gregor. Of course, that's fitting that this a guy that took a wound that should kill him and it's still alive. That seems to fit here. So you've got all these examples of these guys like, oh, it wasn't an accident. Like multiple cases where these guys are just very accurate with where they stick their lance. Well, that sounded euphemistic. But so when we have this example of Robin Rissling, he's the guy that had lost an eye, and he's up here like not giving up because he maybe understands what's happening. He understands perhaps that Leo Longthorn is doing this to get people to surrender to him. It's not chivalrous at all. They're like, he's basically just like making this dangerous for them so that they have to quit. It's like a dirty trick, man.
Yeah.
Like this, we're supposed to believe this like amazing jouster is repeatedly accidentally knocking their helmets off, like because he knocks off like
what a coincidence.
2 or 3.
Yeah.
It happens like 2 or 3 times. So
it reminds me a little bit. It seems like it's so wild, galloping on a horse against someone else galloping on a horse. This long lance you're trying to aim to be able to be that precise. But if you work hard enough at it, I mean, it seems crazy to me how accurate baseball pitchers can be, and batters for that matter, that they're like, trying to get it in, within centimeters with a certain spin at a certain moment with a curve, all these things. It seems just impossible, but it's actually almost scientific.
Yeah.
And and if you become professional, if you work hard and long enough, it's something. And by the same token, it kind of makes me feel like the powers of being in baseball should know when someone hits someone with a ball, they know what they're doing. That wasn't an accident. You should get in big trouble for that.
More often
These tournaments may be the same thing. Yeah, you should. I feel like it should be like when someone gets their helmet knocked off, I feel like the other person should be getting disqualified. You know what I mean?
Sometimes they do. You're right, but and it's the thing that happens is we brought this up with archery before, that some of the best archers in the ancient world were in their 40s. They weren't the young men. Sure, the younger guys and occasionally women have more stamina because they're younger, right? But that accuracy, that like it's doing something really, really, really hard, like moving and shooting a bow at a moving target, like the level of practice you need to do that well is you just never stop. You never master it. You never truly master it. Like your physical capacity diminishes before you can ever truly master it, but you can, become so good at it that you're a human level master. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's a bit of a tangent, but you're right. Like these knights, the ones who can afford it, which is a difference between Hedge knights and some others, they're like Loras. He says it in the show. It's another one where he has a pretty good line there. He's talking to Renly, and Renly's like, "You're so talented." He's like, "Yeah, I'm talented, but I practice every damn day. I got on that horse every day, and I rode every day, and I put that lance in my hand every day. Yes, I'm talented. Yes, I'm rich, but I practiced hard. I also worked my ass off.
I didn't just get lucky."
He's a confluence of those things. He's not a lazy overachiever. He worked hard to, he definitely has a ton of privilege, but he also didn't squander it, right?
Yeah. If he hadn't been born into that privilege, but had the same drive, he might be an expert blacksmith or archer or some other thing.
Or still maybe a great jouster, but probably not.
And Renly and other people were born into just as much privilege. They're not as good as Loras is. So.
Right, yeah. If Renly had practiced as hard as Loras, he still might not have been as good, but he'd have been a lot better.
Yeah.
He probably didn't have. It's probably true that he doesn't have Loras's talent, but he definitely also didn't work as hard. So good points there. Let's take a few questions here in the middle and then get back to the next topic. Varamir Six Skins, that's 6SKYNZ, a nice spelling. He says, "So happy catching this live and wanted to congratulate fellow historian Chris and Ryan on their marriage." Oh, well, excellent. I didn't know about that. Congratulations to Chris and Ryan on their marriage, on y'all's marriage. Excellent. Muchas congratulations. Very good. TKOK Podcast Network says, "Having Sean and Aziz back together these last 3 weeks has been sublime." Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Tommy. We appreciate that. You did an appearance on TKOK recently, didn't you, Sean?
Yeah, we covered The Graduate.
Nice.
Pretty deep dive into that classic film. It was good. And Tommy was recently on History of Westeros talking about Valyrian steel, right?
Yes, that's right. We've been very incestuous lately. We all go on each other's shows. Yeah, that was a really fun episode. It was a little different sort of style from some of the more recent ones. And we had a lot to say. That one went almost 3 hours. Well, the live one was over 3 hours. The edited version was almost exactly 3 hours. Julie A says, "I wonder if Egg would have been more tortured by Aerion had he stayed. Aerion had already threatened to cut off his manhood. Yeah, maybe he would have. I mean, the dude's unhinged. He may have just gone through with it or done something awful. And if you're Egg, are you going to stick around to find out? Like, is he one day just going to go a little farther, or that knife is going to slip? I mean, you don't want to find out."
Yeah, and I pointed out in the chat that it was probably good for Egg's sisters that Aerion was sent away.
Yes, that's true. Oh, man.
And Dornish Dame brought up it makes them wonder if the reference to the love potion in the Sworn Sword was about Rey looking to marriage with Egg as a means of protection from Aerion.
Oh, like, yeah. Oh, wow.
Oh, that's really good.
That is
yeah.
a really good idea. Wow, I'm kind of surprised I never thought of that. Because, yeah, like Aerion, yeah, we think about how bad he was to Egg, but yeah, he probably was awful towards his sisters, too.
Yeah, and he probably expected he would have one as a wife. I mean, he brings up to Egg that he thinks he's going to marry him.
Yeah, and I've been thinking of, I guess my head's been too deep in this comparison to Euron, and Euron, like, lucky for his family that he didn't have sisters.
Well, it didn't really matter.
Yeah, like it would have been, he probably would have done awful things to them if he had them, so good for them for not existing. But, but yeah, wow, that's a great point. I want to bring up a similar point. May as well talk about it now since it pays. At least it's a good point of inference, or is an exercise in perception to put yourself in someone else's shoes. These stories really provide us a lot of opportunities because there's so many characters, and George does a good job of at least highlighting the side characters a little more than is average for books. Maybe in some cases a lot more than average. A lot more in some cases. You're right. Yeah, my head's too deep in this fandom for me to make that perspective. It's probably a lot more. Anyway, he point being that Lord Ashford's daughter. Like, put yourself in her place for all this. Like, she's excited. Think about Sansa. She's going to her first tournament. Like, so excited. Like the pageantry, the excitement. But unlike Sansa, this one's like about her. This is like, she is the center of attention. She's like, Lord Ashford's like highlighting his daughter, like wants to show her off as a marriage option for these fancy houses, wants to make Valar look good. Not only does that part backfire horribly, but like, is she traumatized by all this? Like, Westerosi misogyny is going to be like, oh, she's cursed. Like, she's the one that, like, they held a tournament for her and Baelor died. Like, yeah, I don't know. It seems like, put yourself in her perspective, and it's dark. It's like, man, this poor girl,
Yeah, it's like someone having a birthday on the same day as a shooting or some tragedy or something like that. Yeah,
that exact thing happened to a coworker of mine. I was working in an office environment for September 11th, 9/11, and the next day, none of us went to work that day because they were just like, yeah, don't come in today. Just watch the news. And so we come into work the next day, and one of my coworkers, Scott's like, yesterday was my birthday. We're like, oh man. He's like, yeah, my birthday's ruined forever.
I was in elementary school and we all went into class, right? And it was a girl's birthday. And so like she had brought in cupcakes.
Oh.
It was like very memorable to me.
Man, yeah, that's terrible. That's too bad. Like, yeah, I would just celebrate my birthday a different day. I mean, definitely, it's not as bad 20 years from now. It's not, the sting isn't as like, even if you lived through it or whatever, or were there, it's you can separate it more after time passes.
I feel like, though, she has to be somewhat traumatized by this, even if she didn't see the horrible gore, which she probably saw Baelor's brain fall out. She definitely saw the horse screaming like a human in pain. That alone had to have been awful. Yeah, poor girl.
Yeah, even because that's the part you can compare to Sansa. Sansa saw like Gregor's horse and all that, and the fighting of that. So she saw some of those things, but ultimately that's kind of why I pointed out Loras came out looking really good. So like in the end, the tournament went pretty well for Sansa, even though it was a roller coaster. But other than that, like Loras didn't kind of ignored her, and ignored her later. Like, who are you again? And she was out. That didn't make her happy, but it's like, do I know you? It's like, you gave me the right special rose. Like, oh yeah, you're just some girl. I don't remember. I don't pay attention to girls. So, yeah, that's a good point. Dornish Dame says, yeah, it makes me wonder if the reference to the love potion in the Sworn Sword was about Rey. Oh yeah, this is the same point. Okay, I'm repeating something that was already said. Jonathan Hagee says, Danes don't look Dornish. Aerion may see them as superior Dornish. Yeah, that's a really important point. Yeah, the Danes, They look sort of Dornish, but their look isn't fully established. Let's put it that way. They often have purple eyes. It's not established that they always have them. For example, we don't know what color eyes Arthur had. We do know that Ashara had striking purple, haunting purple eyes, which also is a reason for the Targaryens to choose them as a marriage option. It's a pretty perfect choice. It's like, oh, they're Dornish, and we want Dornish marriages to bring the realm together, but they look like us. They look like Targaryens a lot of times. So that's just kind of an obvious, like, this is a great things line up sort of situation. That's a good point with Jonathan saying maybe that because of their look, so much of it comes down to that. He may, not look down on them as much. Good call. Also, like another comment from Julie, the striking size, like Brienne, right? We talked about how she turns heads wherever she goes, although a lot of them are like looking down on her, well, metaphorically, obviously, because she's bigger than they are. And Dunk, the same thing. But with Dunk, we think of other characters like Hodor, right? Like Hodor is a big character, a big guy, and maybe even Dunk's ancestor or descendant, but we're not really ever in his head. Brienne, so we don't really have a POV that is respected for their size, because in Brienne's case, it's the reverse. It's like so this is a new perspective for us. Not only do we have a lowborn character, a hedge knight, something we don't get in A Song of Ice and Fire, we have someone who's big, who doesn't necessarily realize they're big. Right? He doesn't go around looking like, wow, look how big I am. It's through his eyes people react to his size. And we're like, oh yeah, look how people are constantly looking up at him. And that's why the Laughing Storm is a little interesting to me, because that's one of the few characters that's also really big, and you can kind of get up like, oh, that guy's as big as me. Someone that doesn't look at me as a huge man, right? I have my own personal experience with this, not being 7 foot tall or whatever. I'm almost exactly average height. So nope. But I've experienced it indirectly by going to Thailand with our mutual friend, Chris Honan. You know Chris Honan, of course, Sean. Yeah. Chris Honan is 6'7" and has a large facial scar from his time in the military. So he doesn't look at all like a Thai person, like a normal Thai person. So walking down the crowded streets of Bangkok with him was very interesting, because I would stand behind him so I could see the reactions to other people. Would be like double taking, like, whoa, look at that guy. That's what their eyes would be saying. Like they'd turn, like they'd look, and then they'd look away, then they'd look back with their eyebrows raised. And it's a real trip for me just watching like dozens of people having this reaction like constantly, because it's super, like, Bangkok is like 11 million people. It's one of the largest cities in the world. So you're walking in middle of like a main street downtown where there's just so many people. This effect is magnified. It's like if you had a drone like looking down on this, you could just like measure all the head turns by like the top of their heads are going to be dark colored, because most Thai people have like a dark color hair, but as their heads turn to look up, you would then see the light of their faces and their eyes instead. And it's just like this pattern of all these faces turning at the same moment as this large object passes between them. So I think it's, I remember like one time
I was walking, this is long ago enough that, but when Rudy was still, I mean, he's still tall, but he's lost a lot of weight, but when he was still big, and with Chris Honan, I was walking with the two of them, and we were coming up toward like a reflective, a building where we could see our reflection. I was like, geez, my friends Hulk. Rudy and Chris are both just little old me, and they're like towering above me. I'm like, holy, it's a very striking image to see our reflection. Yeah.
I also can relate just to big people when Dunk is described, for example, because my brother is 6'8". Yeah. And so I was like a little egg, and he could just toss me all around. I just have a very clear image of that disparity.
He's a lot older than you too, right?
Yeah, he's 11 years older than me. So it would be basically exactly like Egg and Dunk, because Egg is more like 6-7 years younger than Dunk.
So when he was 21, he would have been fully grown, and you would have been like 10, and you would have still been like 4 feet at most.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. Dunk and Ash.
It was actually Ash and Ash.
Yeah, Ash and Ash, Ashton and Ashay. Yep. That's pretty cool. So, thanks for the questions, y'all. Let's get back to it. But real quick, I want to make a couple mentions. I want to shout out our friends over at Shire Post Mint. They're doing great work over there. They've been sort of a partner of ours for a long time. We're also friends of ours. We always go say hey to them whenever we're at a convention and they have a booth. They basically started as a mom and pop shop down in a basement, just making coins for Lord of the Rings. Shire, right? Shire Post Malone. No, not Shire Post Malone. But they have since expanded to do, obviously they've done Song of Ice and Fire. I have a sack of Shire Post Mint coins over there, all sorts of cool stuff. But they've done Conan, they've done King Killer Chronicles, they've done just a lot of different coins from a lot of fandoms. Now they've really expanded, plus just like fun coins, Roman replica coins, just lots of cool stuff. And you can get a 10% discount on any purchase there. Go to historyofwesteros.com, click on the Shire Post Mint, and start shopping. Also, I want to shout out our Discord channel for a specific reason. We're doing an Expanse reread over there. Just a few of us are just talking about the Expanse, and we've just started. We've just started the short stories. Only the first 3 short stories have been scheduled or have been reached on the schedule. We're about to start the first book. So if you want to get involved, it's definitely not too late. As of it's July 11th, as of this recording. So by the time you hear this, we probably haven't gone that much farther. So really fun. Expanse is great. There's a lot of Expanse connections to A Song of Ice and Fire. Well, really on the meta level, George R. Martin is connected to those authors in a number of ways. So that's cool. Also, it's just a fantastic story and world. So there's that. So if you want to get involved, head over to our Discord and hit the Expanse Reread channel. Okay. Let's talk about...
We have a super chat here from Dan Windsor.
Oh, I missed that.
Who sends a hippo victory sticker.
Well, thank you, Dan Windsor, Lord of the H. Much appreciated.
Hippos are my favorite animal, so I like that.
It's he's chosen, since he is Lord of the H, he's chosen an H animal.
Oh,
the
perfect.
H, perhaps the longest H animal, hippopotamus. I can't think of a...
Yeah, that's true.
I can't think of a longer H animal.
Let's spend the rest of the podcast trying to think of the answer.
Could probably, some dinosaur with an H could probably like...
Yeah, that's true.
Tyrannosaurus
muted,
Rex,
Sean.
you know. The dubbing and the
thank you.
The dubbing and the apples is our next spot here. We've talked a little bit about dubbing. This aspect of it is another subtopic under that umbrella. The plumber, the steward, says any knight can make a knight. It's more customary to stand a vigil and be anointed by a septon before taking your vows. Now, he says more customary. Obviously, he doesn't say it's a rule, and that's important. There's a lot of work done by it not being a requirement. But it's also kind of ironic because, as Nina points out, Raymond Fossaway doesn't have any vigil or any septon or anything. It's a lot. You know what it reminds me of, Sean, is like a battlefield promotion. Like, obviously, in the real world military, most promotions are done with some signed paperwork and some back and forth, a little bit of time, approvals and stuff like that. But sometimes the officers are all dead in a real war situation, and someone has to be like, sometimes it's temporary promotion, but sometimes a lot of times it sticks, right? Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah.
Am I off there?
It's very regimented, the process for getting promoted. There's a certain minimum time and grade, and then you have to take certain classes, and you have to get a recommendation from your officer, and at certain levels you have to stand in front of a board. At higher rank, like generals, have to be approved by Congress. But on the battlefield, a lot of times when sometimes tragically a lot of people can get killed all at once, and someone's got to be in charge, and also, not to mention, usually there's sort of a chain of command in addition to like the ranks. Like, ostensibly any captain can tell any lieutenant or any sergeant what to do, but usually you would only tell someone in your own unit what to do. A captain telling a private from some other unit, technically they're allowed to, but they might even get in trouble for it, But on a battlefield, people might just get thrust together. They're on a plane, they jump in, they're scattered, someone dies. all right, we need someone to be in charge of this squad taking that hill. Private, you're the sergeant in command now. Go do it. Usually after the battle, they're way more likely to get promoted to sergeant. Usually it's temporary till afterwards, but once you've actually been in battle acting as a sergeant, you're probably going to get that promotion, you know?
Yeah. Now, of course, caveat, what Sean's describing is the U.S. military. Now, Sean was a soldier, so he knows a lot of this pretty well. But obviously, there's other militaries throughout history and currently that would not have all the same rules. Some of them would be pretty similar, but there's also examples in world of, say, Lord Commanders of the Kingsguard becoming Lord Commander in the battle. Like a Lord Commander dies, new guy is named Lord Commander. There's one Lord Commander who was only Lord Commander for like an hour. He got a battlefield promotion, died within that hour, and, well, makes for a good story. So it's really important. We see that there's a lot of, amidst this pastiche of class and honor amongst the concept of knighthood, the knight that dubs you. It is important. It's not just this standing vigil and whether a septon does the oils and whether you say the right words. More importantly, probably, is because this is remembered going forward a lot more than where you stood your vigil, and that stuff gets forgotten. No one's going to even know. But who dubbed you? That is a little more likely to be remembered. That's more likely to stick around, more likely to be important, more likely to be brought up at parties, you know. So this is a quote. This first part, I'll read the question, and Sean, you read George R. Martin's answer. The question is, and why did Lord Frey ask Robb to see about Oliver's knighting when he had more than enough anointed knights at his disposal to attend to the matter?
So, why should someone go to Harvard when they can get a degree from their local community college? There's great prestige in receiving your knighthood from a king, a prince, one of the King's Guard, or other celebrated legendary knights. Getting knighted by a brother is like kissing your sister. We'll leave Jaime Lannister and the Targaryens out of that comparison. And getting dubbed by the local Hedge knight is like graduating from barber college. You get a sheepskin maybe, but don't try applying to law school.
Yeah, and of course, George isn't denigrating those institutions. He's just pointing out how society tends to look at them, right? Like we can take our own view and say, look, you get a job, you get a diploma from a trade school, you are part of the workforce, you have a job, that's really good. Like that's not something to denigrate at all. But that's
a lot of times later in your life and later in your career, that matters less.
Yes.
Right? Like maybe you just went to your local community college, but after you've been in your career for 14 years and you've got success and built a business or won your cases or whatever it is, it starts to matter a little bit less. Probably the same for a knight, right?
Yeah.
Like, in fact, Dunk, of questionable whether or not he was even dubbed a knight by Arlen, who is a knight that hardly anyone even knows, but eventually he's the Lord Commander, right? So eventually your actions of your life can overcome your start point, but your start point can certainly give you a jump start, and Dunk is an exception to the rule. So.
Yeah, and you wonder if like Raymond was like, I mean, he can't be that unhappy because the Laughing Storm knighted him, and that guy, you know, is pretty famous. Although he did have a rebellion, he did come back and surrender, and it all worked out. So for the most part. So that's pretty good. Like getting knighted by the Laughing Storm, that worked out. The eventual Lord of Storm's End. But had he been knighted by Sir Duncan, the tall, famous knight of the Kingsguard, oh man, is like Dunk was like, no, you don't want to be knighted by me. And it's like, actually, in retro,
you know, another example to that point is Barristan thinks about knighting his squires.
Yeah.
But he knows he's about to lead a coup. He's like, maybe let's make sure this works out first, because I might be dooming them. You know, that being knighted by me, if I get executed after starting a coup, might get them executed. But if the coup is successful, then maybe I'll do it and it'll be more honorable.
Yeah, now that he's apparently led this very successful sortie with his leading his troops out, now being knighted by him definitely gains some prestige. Of course, if we have to wait to see how he's actually received, but
do we think we'll potentially see a battlefield knighting?
Ooh.
I mean, if we're concerned about Barristan's survival.
Good point. Good question. I really like bringing this Barristan example into this. This is really getting me to think. Well, we'll have to keep that one on the shelf. If we have some ideas, we'll throw them out. And y'all in the chat, do the same. Please give us your thoughts. You know,
Yeah, Martin has thousands of pages coming in a story. That's enough for one of these young troops to take over Barristan. For Barristan to die in battle, but someone he knighted become a more central character, loyal to Dany or whatever.
yeah, and that would be, in some ways, that would be really interestingly fitting, because you'd have knights, which is a Westerosi distinction, but they would be like Tumco Lo, who's from the Basilisk Isles.
Yeah, and I mean, that would help with something we've just been dying for. We complain about it all the time, which is just we want more time with these SOC. I mean, we talk about the Dothraki, obviously, most particularly, but just period. I would love to see the Red Lamb.
Yeah. It's neat, too. Nina writes this parallel between Dunk and Egg and Raymond Fossaway. They're boys from very different backgrounds, but they all want to be knights. Throw Bran in the mix if you want to bring the first character we're introduced to in A Song of Ice and Fire. Like, he starts off like one of the actual first lines it's an entire arc is thinking about the Kingsguard, like how he wants to be in the Kingsguard. I mean, it's not in his first chapter. I think it's in his second chapter. And then his third chapter is his fall. So, or no, he falls at the end of the second chapter. That's right. It's the end of that one. Yeah. Anyway, so it's a very much a recurring theme. Boys wanted to be knights. I mean, I don't know about you, but for a while when I was a kid, I wanted to be, a cowboy. It's kind of the same thing.
My dad, when he was a kid, he wanted times are a little bit different now, but when he was a kid, he wanted to be one of two things: a garbage man or a fireman, because they got to ride on the outside of the truck.
That's fantastic. So they each have these other, like, they have these ways of getting to it. And like Egg is with Daron, his drunk older brother. And he's like, well, how am I ever going to become a knight through this method? Right? Like, how am I ever going to get there through this? And meanwhile, Raymond Fossaway, kind of the same. Like, his cousin's kind of holding it over him. He's like, yeah, you're not ready. Like, he wasn't being very good about it. So Raymond, by breaking free, all three of these guys broke free of their main influence, and it worked out for them. Now, in Dunk's case, Sir Arlen wasn't like bad to him, but still, to become a knight, he had to, it was kicked off by this Sir Arlen's death, whereas Egg's journey is kicked off by leaving Garon, and Raymond's journey is really kicked off by finally getting away from Stefan. That was a nice little triangulation. 3 characters. The knight must have 3 swords, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the apples. Let's talk about Fossaway. This is a good lead-in to their family. The last time we had queer foreign fruits. This time we have straight native fruits. They are definitely one of the houses that, when you add up their appearances, are pretty prominent. The Fossaways first appear in A Clash of Kings. So this is yet another example on the meta level of, like, George wrote this story alongside A Clash of Kings, and these world-building details sort of came out at the same time. They're one of the, say, 15-ish houses. There's not an exact number on that, but it's in the mid-teens that claim direct descent from Garth Greenhand. Their claim is accepted. There's some other claims out there that are, as to use Olena's term, a bit dodgy. But it's really hard to dispute theirs, because there's a famous figure named Foss the Archer, who was one of Garth Greenhand's sons, and so they're Fossaway. Like, like the name, it's right there, right? It's in the name. There's a notable Lord Owen Fossaway during the Dance of the Dragons, who was one of the Caltrops, so we might see him on TV. Sir John Fossaway is of the Green Apple Fossaways, so he's an ancestor, or God, I keep doing that, a descendant of the cadet branch we see formed here in this very novella. The Green Apple Fossaways, of course, didn't exist prior to this novella. And John Fossaway, shows up at Storm's End in Catelyn and Davos's chapters in A Clash of Kings. And then Sir Garland Tyrell, Garland the Gallant, is married to Leonette Fossaway. And you've met her. We've all met her. She sat next to Tyrion and Sansa at the Purple Wedding. She's the one that had that sort of quip about when Tyrion finished that line. He's like, and cut off poor Tyrion's nose. She's the one who's like, you're a better singer than this Galleon of Kai. They were both like very conspicuously nice to Tyrion, which so nice that it's like, Anyway, but that's very much another topic. But returning to a question that is bearing a lot of fruit, thanks again, Javi Marcos, for your question about where Blackfire references might have appeared had they been fully developed by the time the story was written. And I have to think this is a huge bullseye. A bullseye, a William Tell bullseye with an apple on, someone's head. Because how great a fit would it be to talk about a cadet branch of House Targaryen amidst the formation of a cadet branch of this apple family? You have the red dragon cadet branch turning into the black dragon. You have the red apple turning into the green. Whereas, of course, in the Dance of the Dragons, it was the green versus the black. So you've got red, green, black. It's the three main colors of apples and dragons. And brown, frankly. Rather, Franklin, not Frank Lee. Franklin Flowers, quote,
The prince acknowledged him with a nod. Flowers is a bastard name. You're from the Reach? My mother was a washerwoman at Cider Hall till one of my lord's sons raped her. Makes me sort of brown apple fast away the way I see it.
So this is a great thread to follow. Franklin is part of the Golden Company, which is, of course, a product of the Blackfire rebellions via Bittersteel. So how about that? This is a deep levels connections of both themes and direct plotting here. Not just like behind the scenes connecting dots, but this is a pretty direct through line to the Golden Company appearing into the story as, championing a guy who may be a low-key Blackfire. And Nina also writes, it's a wonderful bit of irony here. Stefan abandons Dunk to back Aerion because Aerion promises to make him a lord, but Rayman is gonna found a new house and get lands as well. The Cider Hall is the seat of the Red Apple Fossilways, but now there's this New Barrel. George really leans into these these names. New Barrel. So Raymond Fossilway is probably the first knight of New Barrel. And best guess, these lands are established after the third Blackfire Rebellion, which would be the next time there's actual fighting, because the second Blackfire Rebellion is barely a war. So great guess. I agree with this guess that the lands of New Barrel were established after the third Blackfire Rebellion, when you would have a time that rebellious lords would have lands taken away from them, and those who stayed loyal would have these lands given to them. We see this right after the Battle of the Blackwater, right? So, and I think maybe we're being set up to see that again. Franklin Flowers, Fossilway bastard, brown apple Fossilway, as he says it. What are the odds that that's the land he wants? Not New Barrel, but Cider Hall, because that's probably a fancier spot. And that's, where he was from. His mother was a washerwoman at Cider Hall, not at New Barrel. So that's who he would want. That's who he has descent from. That's who he would want revenge against. So if we see young Griff grant this title to Franklin Flowers because he's a captain in the Golden Company, or sergeant in the Golden Company, I guess he is a captain. Anyway, well, you have already had the groundwork laid out for you, so you will know why it's a momentous land giveaway and not just another random person getting some land. So there you go. And that would make him perhaps similar to his distant ancestor, Sir Derek Fossaway, who was an exiled knight infamous enough to have been one of the Band of Nine, a.k.a. the Nine Penny Kings. He probably wanted Cider Hall too, among other things. For more on him, check out our episodes on the Nine Penny Kings. There's two of them. And this Derek and Franklin, as members of the Fossaway family, they remind us of what happens when claimants lurk across the sea, just like it was with the Blackfires. Speaking of, let's not forget the promise of sorts that Franklin Flowers makes in A Dance with Dragons. Quote,
Rivers was smiling in approval. Others traded thoughtful looks. Then Peake said, I would sooner die in Westeros than on a demon road. And Mark Mandrake chuckled and responded, Me? I'd sooner live, win lands in some great castle. And Franklin Flowers slapped his sword hilt and said, So long as I can kill some Fossilways, I'm for it.
It's much more believable than this promise made back in A Clash of Kings Catelyn 2 by another Fossaway.
Sir Mark Mullendore brought a black and white monkey and fed him morsels from his own plate, while Sir Tanton of the Rat Apple Fossilways climbed on the table and swore to slay Sandor Clegane in single combat. The vow might have been taken more solemnly if Sir Tanton had not had one foot in a gravy boat when he made it.
First of all, shout out to our good friend Sanrixian, who drew the best ever fan drawing of a fantasy monkey of all time. She drew Mullendore's monkey with armor, because he did have a little suit of chainmail, according to the text. Sir Tanton, Gravy Boat Man, did survive the Battle of the Blackwater. No word of whether it was because he kept the gravy boat on. Gravy boats are better than other boats when wildfire is flying around, because all those other boats were burned. And, well, the gravy boat probably did fine. Really, though, the man the Fossilways should want to kill isn't Sandor Clegane, not the guy who, Sir Tanton says he swore to kill. It should be Lothar Brune. Why Lothar Brune? And, well, he's not exactly easy to get at right now. Lothar Brune is in the Vale with Sansa and Elaine. Well, both of them. Sansa and Elaine. He's one of Littlefinger's top men. During the Battle of the Blackwater, Sir Lothar Brune killed Sir Brian Fossaway and Sir Edward Fossaway, and then captured the aforementioned Sir John Fossaway. He didn't bother with Gravy Boat guy. Probably because, you don't need to worry about that guy. But he was given the nickname Lothar Apple Eater. These families with their proud heritages, you have a guy walking around named Lothar Apple Eater who got that name because he killed multiple Fossaways.
That should be your arch nemesis.
Right? Yeah. Seriously.
Your Apple nemesis.
Which is a segue to the night, to the format of this tournament, the challenging, right? You get to challenge whoever you want. And it's really interesting the way that fits into the style of corruption that's being run around here, right? We've got this example of, well, you have to pick who you want to pick. Do you dare challenge this guy? Do you dare have the social? Do you have the social currency to challenge someone this far ahead of you? When it's just a bracket system, when the randomness determines it, you're not jumping up socially by challenging someone. The challenge happens for you. You're not making a decision. But here, it's almost like they know that. This is going to keep... The format supports their goals, basically, is what I'm getting at. We've kind of spoken to this already, but I wanted to make sure that part was clear. Even Aerion doesn't challenge Valar, right? Of all the... He isn't doing it. But who does he challenge? He challenges the lowest born champion, Harold Harding, who distinguished himself. That guy was kicking butt, right? But he was clearly the lowest born of the champions. Obviously, Dunk isn't a champion. Dunk is lower born, but he wasn't a champion at that moment. So, this is so really, that's a big deal, right? He's teaching this upstart a lesson. It's you beat all these people, you're lowborn, I'm going to embarrass you. But of course, it backfires because Arion's concept of what's embarrassing and what isn't is pretty off.
Yeah, he ends up embarrassing himself. Dunk does think at one point that Harding, if he had to choose, would be the true winner of the tourney, because he had, I think, won 14 jousts, more than anyone else, which is crazy.
Yeah, he was the most impressive. Yeah.
But that you could see all the more reason why Arion would want to put a stop to it,
Yeah, and why? And the very people stood up to that. They're like, yeah, it's so obvious that Arion has done a bad thing here, but jumping ahead of myself, but almost no one was willing to back him up. Are there new true knights among you? Well, yeah, we'll get to that. So, when we speak of how beautifully George has managed to tie Dunk's story to his likely ancestor Brienne, this biggest examples is coming along here. One of the very first things we learn about Brienne, apart from her physical prowess, her size, just the obvious, details that you see from the outside, is her naive view of knighthood and chivalry. A big part of her arc is that falling off, her learning the truth of what real knights are like, but sticking to it anyway. It's beautiful, right? She stays, she's oh, wow, very few knights actually uphold these knightly ideals. all the more important that I do so then. She's not like, oh, well, then
Yeah.
rather than just going with the crowd, she's like, oh, that makes it even more important that I do it. And Dunk is of this same attitude with just a couple of buddies. That's really beautiful to me that this is a central theme of this. And it really spins the name Brienne the Beauty on its meaning. Like they're mocking her, but she really is beautiful in this sense in her attitude. And very few knights have this attitude that she has, and it's really standout. So Dunk is learning that too. It's different because he's learning it not quite as much out in the world in war, not by losing half of his face and these other awful things that happened to Brienne, but he's confronted by a bunch of examples of knights not acting like knights at all, like blatantly. There's cheating, there's favoritism, there's exclusion, and there's a few bright spots. But of course, he dies at the end. The biggest bright spot. So it's these twin concepts, like we talked about Leo Tyrell's trick and Loras Tyrell's trick. That's another example of privilege and wealth. You're like, well, how does that? What do you mean, Aziz? Well, it's insider knowledge, right? Loras knew this trick about horsemanship, about a stallion in heat, because he's been around horses and wealth his whole life. Like you can't be around horses without having money unless you're like a stable boy or something like that. You're either employed with horses or you're rich and own horses. There's not a lot of in between there, even in this world. I mean, in our world, it's even more true. Of course, horse knowledge isn't nearly as valuable in our world, but it's still, it makes the case. So I think that's touches back on what we were saying about Loras and Gregor and all that. Is like that trick, like, would Dunk have even conceived? I'm not saying he would have used it even if he thought of it, but it wouldn't have even occurred to him. Like, but
Yeah.
the Tyrells have been jousting for centuries. Like, this is something that they just know. It's
another thing that Loras might have an extra awareness of, as we pointed out, how much he practices. He probably at one point rode a mare that was in heat and realized, oh, I can't do this. I got to be careful about which horse I'm picking in the first place,
Yeah.
So.
And people watching, like Sansa, didn't know.
Trick, but still some value of his experience.
Yeah. And it's like the people who were watching who knew horses, like they understood Loras' trick, but it's not out in the open. It's not like, oh, Loras was cheating, because it was subtle enough that most people don't even notice, right? The reason it even got noticed was because Gregor cut his horse's head off. That kind of made Sansa like go, what the hell? And then someone explains it to her. But if Gregor just like grumbles and marches off, it might not even get brought up that Loras was cheating, right?
Yeah.
And here it's even more subtle. It's not obvious that they're throwing it for Valar, right? It's not obvious at all. But it is there. Like once you're clued into it, it becomes obvious once the concept is raised, I think. Like George R. R. Martin here, he says, one of his quotes is, it's pretty plain in the Hedge Knight, if you read between the lines, that everyone was bending over backwards to make Valar look good. And he doesn't say cheating, just bending over backwards. Like there's the one guy that, here's a quote. The most direct example where Dunk seems to be realizing it. It's the one that starts with, he had won 9 victories.
He had won 9 victories, but it seemed to Dunk that everyone was hollow. He's beating old men and up-drunk squires, and a few lords of high birth and low skill. The truly dangerous men are riding past the shield as if they do not see it.
That line right there, the truly dangerous men are riding past the shield as if they do not see it. That's the one that I think is the biggest clue of all. And yeah, George loves irony, so it's funny how this all works out. We talked about how backwards it all goes. Like nothing like wanting to show off for the Targaryens only for the prince to die. Bittersteel, though, over across the Narrow Seas is like, yeah, all right, good tournament. Good job. And it's interesting too, the difference between Baelor. Baelor isn't like Valar. Like you wonder what's in Valar's head. Does Valar realize that everyone's throwing it for him? Does he get it? Is he clued into this? Like we don't know much about Valar, whether he's a smart kid or the only moment we really get with him is he's like, man, don't get away from me. You're the reason my father's dead. Which I get it. Like he's bitter. Like it doesn't mean he's a bad guy. I don't hold that against him. He's
dealing with grief. Like 3 weeks later, he might have been kinder to Dunk. 2 days prior, he might have been kinder to Dunk. It's hard to know.
Yeah.
And I also wondered if maybe Valar even maybe he does know it and he's frustrated by it. You know, maybe he wants a real challenge. It's all the crappy nights, you know, like,
he understands he's being coddled, maybe. But that's the question. I wonder if he realizes that it would be, it's hard because in some ways it's really obvious, but in some ways, like when you're the recipient of it, you know, when you're in the middle, when you're raised, like he's not that old, you know, he's kind of, you know, I don't know. I wouldn't assume he knows. So.
Yeah. It's also, if I remember right, just the first day. Maybe he thinks, well, tomorrow someone will challenge me, you know, but
yeah.
Maybe I want to paint him in a brighter light since he's Baelor's son, but maybe he asked to make sure it happened that way. You know, it could be the other end of the spectrum.
You never know. You know, like Baelor might have put his thumb on the scale just a little bit because it's a little, like one sentence from him says a lot, right? Because of who he is, you know.
Can I just bring up real quick how fitting it is that the Targaryen that this is happening to is Valar Targaryen, which is the exact opposite of Valor.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, and it just once again reinforces the classism in place here. Valar's getting all these like advantages. They're like helping him win. Yet when someone like Harold Harding comes in and just does really well on merit alone, Arryn kills his horse and breaks his leg.
Yeah.
It's so awful. It's like this sort of stuff happens in regular society all the time. We just don't see it. I'm sorry?
You said Harold. It's Humphrey.
Oh, Humphrey. I'm sorry. Yeah, of course. The two Humphreys. Harold is, of course, the current character that Sansa's going to marry. Harry the heir. Getting Harry the heir confused with Harold the non-heir.
Humphrey the dead.
I said Harold again. Humphrey the dead. Yes, Humphrey the awesome. So... yeah, and this happens again in the mystery. Now we'll be coming back to this. It's like the knights who lose on purpose are rewarded. The knights who refuse to lose on purpose get a lance in the face and false charges of grand theft dragon egg, right? And the lance in the face comes up from a professional tourney knight who cheats regularly and talks about how common it is, right? Like, it's just, oh man. So the dirty underbelly to tournaments, nights and tournaments in general is like such a contrast to what Sansa sees from our first tournament we ever get in these books. So, yeah. We have saved up some sort of funny moments. Here's one that I think is kind of funny, but also just under the radar, kind of a little tongue in cheek, shall we say, or maybe something else in cheek. Here's a quote that reminds us of a few things.
Which one are you at,
Lord
sir?
Karen. It's short. I'll say it. Lord Karen, harper and singer and knight of renown, touched the point of his lance to Lord Tyrell's rose. So there's some Lyanna Rhaegar vibes there, you know, harper, a guy who's both a harper and a singer. And a rose, right? The blue rose. It's a gold rose instead of a blue rose. But mostly that line is just really gay, especially if you consider the next line in the same context. Sir Joseph thumped on Sir Humphrey Harding's diamonds. Think I'm exaggerating? Well, the next line is, shortly after, not the next line, but shortly after we have the Harp Lord and the Rose Lord were going at each other lustily with blunted long axes to the delight of the roaring crowd. So a little homoeroticism under the radar there. Dunk certainly doesn't notice what's between the lines there. And he's not going to notice it when Sir John the Fiddler flirts with him and says, I'd like to try my lance on you. So really, this is a regular feature of the Dunk and Egg novellas is people, you know, a little bit of, mostly it's directed at Dunk because he's apparently pretty hot. I mean, he's a huge man, so that tracks. So that's pretty funny. It's also like a connection to Brienne. Again, Brienne not maybe getting that Renly was into men or just not mattering to her. But she also, you know, Renly had a favorite Tyrell Rose also who involved some lance point touching. Staying on the subject of non-cis relationships, we have horses won't charge a spear wall. Okay, where are you going with this, Aziz? Like, what? Well, Shay and I had noticed something on video the other day that was very amusing.
Yeah. There was a video of, how streets, they'll do the crosswalks, they'll, paint them rainbow for Pride Month or whatever.
Or just in general.
Yeah, or just in general, sure. I haven't seen it in general besides
There's one here in Atlanta. It
was painted for Pride Month originally, though.
Oh, but it stayed that way.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right.
But they left it.
Yeah, the one out by between Outright and.
So, anyways, it was some horses with some of those the police horses, walking down the road, and they come across one of those rainbow crosswalks, and they just would not cross it. They looked so freaked out. They were like going around, like sidling around, getting on the sidewalk, just doing everything they could to avoid it. And I don't think it's that they aren't comfortable around rainbows. I believe it's that
anti-gay horses.
Yes, homophobic horses. No, I don't think it's that. I think it was just really unusual to them. They aren't used to that sort of thing on the ground, and the horses got spooked by it. And then the other horses kind of followed suit with the first horse.
Yeah, it's really neat. They're just like really afraid of this rainbow crosswalk. But I think it's color because horses don't see the same colors as we do, and it might look black. Like we one time put our a cat's food dish on this red just mat, and he freaked out. He was like, what the hell is this? Because I think it looked like a black hole to him, because cats don't see red that well. Because he was like touching with the tip of his paw, like, what is that? Like, oh my god. So yeah, it was probably something like this where it just looked like a pit. Right, like oh my god. So yeah, horses don't charge a spear wall, and this is historically interesting. Horses, like, a trick in ancient warfare was to open a gap in the infantry lines, not just so you could have like a physical space to charge through and disrupt their cohesion, but physically the horses wouldn't charge unless that was there. They needed to see that, or they just wouldn't do it, because horses aren't the most intelligent animals, but they're not suicidal. They're not like, yay, like they're not completely blind to the danger of running into what looks like a wall of people. They may not realize the spears are dangerous, but it's still like animals don't run into walls like at high speeds like on the regular. So there's just some basic common sense here.
That reminds me of the horses and the rainbows and such. It reminds me of a video I saw. I think it was an Ozyman reviews, how he and it's two horses coming down a trail, and there's a little bunny rabbit on the trail, and it just freeze. They like step forward and step back, and like the humans trying to coax them, and they're like, and Osman's like doing the horse's thoughts about like, you go first, I'm not doing it, that thing could get us. Have you seen that? It was hilarious.
I think I've seen that one. He also does one where there's that one with the geese and the cows, and or one goose, and there's all these cows that are like charging the goose, and the goose does not back down. Like a cow comes full speed at the goose, and it doesn't flinch at all. Like it doesn't even take one step back, and the cow stops. The cow's like, it breaks its charge, because it's like it's so thrown by the goose's insane courage.
It might be a stone goose, and the cow doesn't want to hurt itself. It's like trampling over.
Which brings us back to the point: animals don't charge stationary objects very often, unless you make them really mad. Anyway, so real quick as well, Nina did us the favor of doing a rundown of what happens to the challengers and the champions. It's mostly not good. Humphrey Harding, of course, dies by the end of the tournament. He's killed during the trial of 7. Medgar Tully dies within 2 years of the tourney. We don't know why. He's succeeded by an 8-year-old, and that becomes, that's brought up during the Mystery Night. Daemon Lannister, the Grey Lion, dies of the spring sickness next year. Tybolt Lannister, who we see as a challenger, dies under suspicious circumstances in 212 AC. And Sorel becomes Lady of Casterly Rock, but she dies less than a year later as well, which also perhaps suspicious. Valar dies of the Great Spring Sickness as well, so he doesn't even last a full year after this. Leo Longthorn, no idea, but he's already considered older here, and he's said to be ailing by 212, so yeah, he probably just doesn't last much longer. Lionel lasts for a while. He lives at least till the 240s, so he's around for quite a while. He does have a rebellion. It's his daughter that was supposed to marry Duncan, the Prince of Dragonflies, because he goes and marries Jenny of Oldstones instead, Jenny's song. So that results in a rebellion and a trial by combat. This one you might not know about, Sean. Did you know that much later that Lionel Baratheon will fight a trial by combat against Duncan the Tall?
No, really?
Yeah. There's a really famous piece of artwork in the World of Ice and Fire. It's huge, full page of the two of them in their full armor. The Laughing Storm with his big antlers and his big, I guess it's a big hammer. Does he have a hammer or an axe or something? And then Dunk in his full Kingsguard.
You'll have to read the World of Ice and Fire to see how that goes.
It is cool.
Yeah,
it's very cool. And it has an interesting resolution. I'll leave it there. We'll leave it unresolved for you so you can experience it the way it was intended, or close to it. Now, the Ashford brothers, this probably wasn't very good for any of them. The family probably took a hit prestige-wise after this happened under their watch, even though it really wasn't their fault. And of course, the Hightowers, we talk about how they're about to have a big old plague. Not about to. It's, maybe a decade or two, but that's obviously going to definitely, Abelar will be gone by then. Okay, so the accident. The quote-unquote accident. Not an accident at all, of course. We saw what happens. There's Dunk, because he's still has the wool over his eyes about chivalry and naivete about knighthood, offers the possibility that it was an accident, but Egg is like, without saying he knows that guy, he's like, I know that guy. That wasn't an accident. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's really no argument there. It was definitely on purpose.
Especially after we just talked earlier about how the knights can be very adept at what they're doing, and this wasn't even like the 6 inches difference between like the helm and the shield. This was like the 2 foot difference between the neck of the horse and the shield. So,
by the way, another piece of art to check out, shared in our Facebook group by Shea, was Aryan Brightflame's like tournament regalia, his armor and his like flaming cape, and it looks awesome. Like, you would be that it's hard to imagine a more intimidating set of armor. Now, of course, these knights are not going to be intimidated by just, the shape of someone's armor, but the idea might be the reason Aryan in one chose to fight the lowest born guy there would be perhaps to get him to go easy on him. Maybe he thinks that they won't try as hard against him because he's a prince and this guy's so low born, he might think class protects him a little bit. Of course, he doesn't even let it get that far. He just spears the guy's horse right away before there's anything else could even happen.
Yeah.
Interestingly, of all the people to have their horse killed under them during the Hands tournament early in A Game of Thrones, is Beric Dondarrion's horse was killed by a hedge knight in a checkered cloak. A checkered cloak.
A checkered cloak.
That's Humphrey Harding has red and white diamonds. He's got a checkered cloak. So, of course, this is obviously not the same guy or even the same family, but it might be George having a little fun with a reversal there, because it's the lowborn knight kills the highborn instead of the other way around. And of course, very famously, Willis Tyrell fought Oberyn Martell in a tournament, and that's what cost him his leg. Now, that, of course, according to Oberyn, wasn't really his fault, and Oberyn makes a decent case that Willis wasn't ready to be fighting in such company. But there's still an element of chivalry to that, right? Like, well, Barristan the Bold shouldn't have been fighting in that tournament either, but that doesn't mean you have to, like, treat him like he's not a boy. Like, he's a competitor in the tournament. I'm not going to go light on him, even though he's 10. So clearly Duncan, the Prince of Dragonflies, has a different attitude than Oberyn Martell, but we knew that already without examples. So this moment, Sean, how did this moment strike you when you're reading the story the first time? And I think we're all Dunk when, he didn't believe she was really going to snap her finger, even though, like, there's no reason not to believe it because of who he is. Like, it's so visceral. It's like, you get the horse being speared, and that's, like, way bloodier and gorier, and it's probably a lot louder, but this is so human and, finger. I'm always a little, like, a little weaker kneed when it comes to hand injuries because my mother's a musician and she's real cautious with her fingers, and that was imparted to me by osmosis. So I don't know, maybe that's just a little bit of me, but this is something that this is so just, man, it just brings back memories of like childhood bullies and just people picking on people they can't help. Just like, you hate it so much. It's really well done. It really, like in terms of writing.
Yeah, even the second time reading it, when I kind of knew it was coming, I was like, I had to put the book down for just a second. It's really hard to, sometimes like on TV or movies, or I guess in books or whatever, when 14 people are gutted by chainsaws and blood splattered on the wall, some hyper violent something out of the Boys or Quentin Tarantino movie. It's not as bad as when someone gets their finger broke. Something a little more simple and realistic, more relatable. It's like, geez. And another thing I can't help but think, Casanova sighting. No. Another thing I can't help but think about too is the implications, not just like the pain of that moment, but she's a puppeteer. How's she going to do her job anymore with a broken finger? It's
and not just that, they destroyed all her puppets, like everything. They burned
exactly.
All of it.
Yeah,
it's really bad. It's very much like
ruining someone's life.
It's a real parallel to what Dunk is worried about. Like Dunk is worried that if he doesn't win his first match, he loses his armor, his horse, his livelihood. It's the same thing. She just lost that. Now we come to find out she has an uncle that made the puppets, so she probably has, a way to get going again. But still, Arion doesn't know that. He doesn't think of that at all. He's just pure authoritarian, pure cruelty. Just their image. He doesn't care.
Like the punishment fitting a crime is a key part of modern justice.
Yes, and this does not. Yeah, it's like we
assuming it was even a crime she was committing.
Right. Exactly what I was going to say. It's like this isn't even a crime. Like this in America anyway, and plenty of other places around the world, we really like harp on the fact that we're allowed to say almost anything we want. Like it's a pretty important part of American culture. This is not in this society. You can't. Like this is proof. Like it's not against the law what she did, but it's unwise, right? Because there's people like Arion walking around who can do this and probably get away with it. Like it's a very unlikely that Arion didn't get away with this. Like the fact that he didn't get away with this was the upset here. Like he's probably done similar things and gotten away with it.
The exception.
Yeah, you're right. This is the exception rather than the rule. Is Arion doing this kind of thing to someone, and that's it. No consequences for him. Lots of consequences for his victim, and that's the end of it. Well, not for them, but for him. He probably doesn't even think about it again. And so that now we've alerted you all to countless times that George loves to give answers to riddles before giving the riddle itself. He does a kind of a micro version of that here. Here's an Easter egg. Takes place the conversation between Raymond and Sir Duncan that starts with the line, "Poor Makar."
Oh, shoot. Sorry, I'm not where you are. Here we go. Poor Makar.
Poor, said Dunk Stutter. The king's son?
The king's fourth son, said Raymond. Not quite as bold as Prince Baelor, nor as clever as Prince Aerys, nor as gentle as Prince Rhaegal. And now he must suffer seeing his own sons overshadowed by his brothers. Daron is a sot. Arion is vain and cruel. The third son was so unpromising they gave him to the Citadel to make a maester of him. And the youngest...
Sir Duncan! Egg burst in panting.
Yeah, this is I really appreciate this foreshadowing. I knew reading this that Egg was, who his identity was. But like my dad, for example, I don't think he knew. I don't think I told him. I don't know if my dad had pieced it together at that point. Maybe it's more obvious than I realize. I wonder how many readers. I sort of assume most, not just 51%, but probably like 90% of readers starting these books already know that.
I didn't, but of course I read them, a long time ago, and that was neat. I was like, oh, that's so cool. Yeah, it was a nice, legit surprise for me. I definitely didn't catch this moment where Egg jumps in just as they're saying, and the youngest.
Yeah.
Like, there he is. Oh, speak of the devil Egg. And you might say the timing of this is quite unlikely, and
Can I just
he is
point out that you said "speak of the devil," the egg. I think we all moved past that a little too quick.
That's how you have to do it. When you're me and you make lots of puns and you're not sure which ones are going to be funny. When no one reacts, you just have to keep going because it's like, oh, I guess they just didn't like that one. So it's just part of the game, right? Some eggs don't hatch, So it's pretty cool. It's only a few. You can piece it together. Like you can see it. Like it says a few moments earlier. He says there's only one brother unaccounted for. It says there's the vain and cruel one, the Sot, and then the Citadel, the one who went to he's a maester, so he's clearly not there. And then and then Egg refers to Aerion as brother. He's like, I didn't want to look like you, brother.
Yeah, and we knew already that 2 Targaryens were missing. There's so many clues along the way that I agree. I think George does a great job of giving us a bunch of clues, but still hard to even know, like you said, what the clues are for.
Right.
But then once you realize, you're like, oh, it was right there the whole time.
Yeah.
He's a master of that.
It's like a layer. It's a whole layer of items, and if you find any part of the layer, potentially the whole layer is there. But you have to see the layer to find any of the layer. You have to find one part of it. Any one part of it leads to the rest of it. But if you don't catch any one part of it, you won't get there. It's like R plus L equals J. There's a ton of clues for it, but if you don't start off on that track, you'd be like, and then it's just like a flood, of realization. So. By the way, the third son was so unpromising they gave him to the Citadel? How dare they? First, I have several questions. First of all, how dare you? I mean, so unpromising.
Yeah, I tend to think of Raymond not that poorly, but that's not a great comment.
Yeah, I guess he just doesn't know. It's all rumor. He doesn't know him personally, but still.
It's also maybe more from the warrior perspective, right?
Yeah.
This is someone who wants to be a knight at a tournament. They have a different standard of what makes someone, I don't know, good or a good leader or whatever.
Yeah. It's funny, too, because...
For better or worse.
And Raymond says, poor Maekar, because of all his kids, but that's going to change because of how, so many Targaryens die, and then Maekar actually becomes king, and, all these other things happen. The sons do quite well in the Third Blackfire Rebellion, even though Aerion sucks. He apparently was a capable warrior and was useful, at least in that regard, during the war, and Egg was also a very good warrior. So... that turned out well. Also, I guess the lack of Maekar's reputation as the anvil in the Hammer and the Anvil scenario that happened during the Battle of the Redgrass Field, that would make him look better because he was definitely a war hero. So, of course, because of this, Dunk rushes off to save Tanzel. Now, this reminds us of, we've compared Joffrey to Aerion, but it's Joffrey's mother that is... has a parallel here, or we can maybe throw a little Qyburn into this because Qyburn is the one that asks for these prisoners to experiment on. So he's the worst of all, perhaps. But take your pick. They're all terrible. Here's the line of that when Qyburn is telling Cersei the equivalent example of what Aerion reacts to here in 209 AC at Ashford.
Sorry, I don't know where you are again.
Go to my cursor.
Okay, sorry. He gave her an apologetic smile and told her of a puppet show that had recently become popular amongst the city's small folk. Puppet show wherein the kingdom of the beast was ruled by a pride of haughty lions. The puppet lions grow greedy and arrogant, and as this treasonous tale proceeds, until they begin to devour their own subjects. When the noble stag makes objection, the lions devour him as well, and roar that it is their right as the mightiest of beasts. And is that the end of it? Cersei asks, amused. Looked at in the right light, it could be seen as a salutary lesson. No, your grace, at the end, a dragon hatches from an egg and devours all the lions. The ending took the puppet show from simple insolence to treason.
Yeah, so that's Cersei's inner thought there. Cersei is the one declaring that it's treason. And of course, as I just said, she gives the puppeteers to Qyburn. So that's, as far as being punished for treason, it's even worse than the standard punishment for treason. Normally you're executed or sent to the wall, but they're given to Qyburn is worse than either of those things by far. And kind of a ironic twist of sorts. Obviously it's not obviously it wasn't intended by Aerion, but Dunk was probably going to lose everything by entering this tournament. He was probably going to fail in his first joust, get beat, lose all his stuff. So in a very indirect way, Aerion going and doing his bad thing to Tanzel saved him not only from losing everything, but propelled him more towards his trajectory of becoming Lord Commander of the Kingsguard and being...
You have little faith. You don't think he was going to beat Valar?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. We'll never know. Okay, well, that's a good stopping point. We're right at the point where the Duncan is accosted and beat up by Aerion's men. So next time we'll get to the climax of the story itself and probably be able to finish it. We'll be able to discuss the death of Baelor directly, the similarities to things like Maekar and Stannis killing their own brother and not taking full responsibility for it. Lots of other parallels, lots of other fun stuff. And we've got a few things that we've saved up, such as the aforementioned parallels, but also a bunch of funny lines. Sean and I have taken a note of some good quotes. A few of them we've already cited, as you know, but we've got several more. That'll be fun. That'll be one of the last things we do. Kind of a nice way to do our send-off in between stories. And then, of course, we'll be getting to the Sworn Sword the week after we finish the Hedge Knight, assuming the Hedge Knight is finished next week. We'll see how that goes. Sean, any final thoughts for today or anything you wanted to say as we sign off?
There have been a couple little notes I had here and there that I missed on the way through, most of them contributing to my thoughts on the potential of Dunk being or not being a knight. I might want to touch on those next time also.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just think about that in between, and we'll definitely take that on next time and any other loose ends we have left. So folks, if you have questions that you want answered, since we'll probably be moving on from the Hedge Knight, this is the best time to get them in. If you have questions relating directly to the Hedge Knight, if they're just relating overall to Dunk and Egg, well, they can be fit in pretty much any time during this run through of the 3 stories. But we do appreciate any questions you send. We enjoy answering your questions. But if you don't send them, we'll be just fine. We have plenty to say without them, too.
I do have one order of business. I'll be back.
Kitten time. The kitten must have 3 heads. In the meantime, I'll point out some of the episodes we touched on. Our Blackfire episodes, of course, are relevant here, especially the Ninepenny Kings one. We talked about the Fossilways, and it always pays to brush up on your Barristan the Bold stuff, which is very relevant to those, since he's the one that killed Maelys the Monstrous. Also, of course, our Summerhall episodes are always relevant here. And a number of other episodes will be brought up. Obviously, our coverage of Brienne during A Feast for Crows. We certainly looked at some of the connections to Dunk on the other side of it, looking at Brienne to Dunk rather than Dunk to Brienne. A lot of that was pretty relevant at the time. So check that out as well if you haven't already.
Yeah, kittens on camera now.
Yeah, kitty.
This time we've seen Cora and we've seen Jet, and here's a third kitten.
This is Toffee.
This is Toph.
Toffee,
yeah. She's inspired by the Avatar character Toph, but she's also Toffee kind of color pattern.
She's also one of the most wriggly of the ones we've seen so far.
Yeah. She's the biggest. She barely looks like a kitten anymore. How you doing, girl? Hey. She keeps wanting to look behind me.
Yeah, you can really see how light colored she is compared to Cora now.
The other two.
As they start to lengthen, their pattern comes in more.
Go ahead, sweetie.
Yeah, she's not a star like Cora.
She's got things to do. She's got kitten things to do. She's got business to attend to. You know, far be it from us to question the goings and comings of a kitten. Well, thanks everyone for coming today. I'm sorry, Sean, you were going to say something?
We merely present the comings and goings of kittens.
It's their world. We're just living in it. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming today. Appreciate if you came live and asked questions and hang out in the chat. That is awesome. But if you also catch it afterwards, that is also awesome. We appreciate you listening and or watching and or participating in all the different many ways we have available to participate, or not. If you choose to just be a listener, that is fine too. We are cool with all shapes and sizes of participation. You do what is best for you, what is most comfortable for you, and we'll just keep putting episodes out. Thanks as well to our all of our people who keeping our social media sites running and healthy. History of Westeros mods, our Discord mods, everybody on Facebook, everybody doing all the things, helping keep our discussions extra cool. Thanks again to Nina. Thanks again to Michael Klarfeld for the maps and our video intro. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for the Valar Rereadis music. Thanks to Joey Townsend and Jesse Koval for the regular History of Westeros intro, outro music. Thanks to our Bengineer for editing and sound quality assistance. I do the, editing as far as what gets cut and what doesn't, but Ben works on the sound quality. I want to shout out, of course, as we often do, our friends at Here Be Dragons. They are discussing the Clone Wars again. They've done the Clone Wars before, but now they're up to season 6. There's a lot of Clone Wars to discuss. It's one of the biggest series of Star Wars material outside of the movies, probably the biggest.
While we're bringing up Star Wars, everybody should read the High Republic books.
They are quite good.
I really was actually blown away by the most recent book. It was really good. So there's my recommendation of the week.
The first one's called Light of the Jedi. Second one's called The Rising Storm. They're set, like I said, in the High Republic. So it's quite a while ago. There's not a lot of familiar characters. There's only one character you've heard of.
Yoda.
He's not really in it. He's just mentioned. But that's the cool thing. You have all these Jedi, and a lot of them get full introductions and a little bit of backstory. You have no idea which ones are going to die and which ones aren't. So the conflict is pretty legit. The tension, pretty legit. They're real page turners. They're not. It's not high literature. It is the High Republic, but it's good. It's very solid. It's well written, page turning, good action adventure. Star Wars is fun. If you like Star Wars,
interesting themes that you would imagine, about the militarization of the Republic and the fall of the Jedi, and just how they get to the kind of inferior version that they are during the prequels. Yeah, it's really good.
Very good.
Yeah.
We have given a rousing rendition of that. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everyone. Thanks again. And until next week for more Valar Rereadis.